Welcome to the fifth installment of the Director Dossiers podcast. In this episode, we are detailing the production of and analyzing every movie in Sergio Leone's filmography. If you'd like to see more of these retrospectives, you can like and subscribe on YouTube and follow on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoy. Danny, why don't you break open that dossier?
Oh, yeah.
Where do these dossiers come from, man?
I have no
They're
idea.
always so meticulously researched.
Yeah.
I wonder who is able to do
Some
that.
loser who has too much
No,
time.
no.
I'm joking.
I'm sure he's a
All
great guy.
Yeah. Early life. Sergio Leone was born January 3rd, 1929 in Rome, Italy. His mother, Bice Walerian, and father, Roberto Roberti, worked in the Italian. I'm assuming the Italian film industry.
Film industry.
Very meticulous.
God
Johnny.
damn it. Oh, shit. Okay. Sergio Leone himself said he was basically born in the cinema because his mom was an actress and his dad was a very influential Italian film director at the time. He started to make movies around 1910. His mother's name was something unpronounceable that I'm not going to try to pronounce. That was her real name, but her stage name was Bice Walerian. And then his father's real name was Vincenzo Leone. And he changed his name to Roberto Roberti, which is was oddly like hard to say out loud.
Yeah.
And but he's significant because he made a movie, I think it was 1912, called The Indian Vampire, and it's significant because it was the first Italian Western, or maybe the first. There might have been like one or two, but it's known as one of the first, if not the first, Italian Western, which is interesting because Sergio Leone, of course, would revolutionize that genre of movies in the 60s. And the interesting story, one of the interesting stories about his dad, Roberto Roberti, whose name is very easy to say, is he was approached by this author to adapt a book called The Cardinal's Mistress. And that book was written in 1910 when the author was a struggling journalist at the time. And that author's name was Benito Mussolini, who later became a very big jerk in World War II. Look it up. And he teamed up with this even bigger jerk from Germany. And they got way out of hand.
Yes.
But this is before that. This is like 1920s, early 1920s. So this is just after he came into power or just before, somewhere around there. And he approached Roberti to adapt it and make it into a movie. According to Sergio Leone, he goes, my dad never did it because he said the book was shit or whatever. Also, his dad was a communist, so maybe he didn't like the fascist politics of...
Yeah.
I don't know much about the history around the political atmosphere around that time. But anyway, he said that his dad said the book was shit and he didn't want to do it. But 1960, 1970, somewhere around there, they found a copy of a script, an adaptation written by Roberti. So obviously he did go and adapt it actually. So the story was changed. So now they had to say, all right, either two things happened. Roberti wrote the script and was like, I don't want to do this, or he was enthusiastic to make it. But Mussolini is the one who axed the project because maybe he didn't want to be associated with some of the political ideas that maybe he saw as outdated now that he's taken like this big, important political power. But also talking about the political stuff at the time, his dad was almost exiled because at the time you needed to be a card-carrying member of the fascist party, and he went and applied for it, but the applications got lost, like somebody that got robbed or whatever, something where all the applications got lost, and they were like, hey, you got to do it again. He's like, no, I'm not going to do that. And they're like, well, we're going to exile you. And then there was this minister that he knew that sort of protected him and was able to keep him safe from the political stuff going on at the time. And then he subsequently became, somewhere around there, he became the president of the Italian Film Directors Association, something along those lines.
Was it? Did he have like an early exit to film after that?
Well, his exit. So like I said, he started operating in 1910. He was he was a film pioneer, and I think in 1930 he stopped making movies altogether. I think he had like a 10-year break, and then he made a few movies after that. But he became cynical at the end of his career because he got pushed out because of his communist politics, I think. And also when Sergio was growing up and expressed that he wanted an interest in film, his dad actually, urged him not to go into filmmaking as a career because he hated it so much by that time because he was just so jaded by the whole thing.
I mean, as a creative person in that time, a lot of his ideas were probably getting pushed down, so I could see why that.
Yeah, an incredibly repressive time.
Despite his father wanting him to become a lawyer, Sergio Leone decided to pursue film anyway.
So when he was 19, the first screenplay he wrote was called Valle Glorioso. I don't know how to say it. And that was basically about him and his friends growing up in the late 1930s, early 40s during the fascist regime. And there's a lot of weird stuff in it. Like there's a lot of pissing imagery in it. That actually shows up later in Duck You Sucker as the opening shot there, where Rod Steiger's character pisses on a colony of ants on a tree. But in this, the kids, him and his Sergio, it's basically, remember that time in the late teens, the 20 teens and the early 2020s, the Fablemans and Licorice Pizza and all these directors and Roma and stuff, all these directors were making their nostalgic movie. It was basically his version of that. And there's one scene where the kids play a game where they see who can piss on the most ants. And then there's another scene where they piss down this set of stairs, and whoever's piss got down to the bottom won. There's a lot of piss in the movie. It's weird.
This is a big pee movie. The pee movie.
Italian pee movies. But yeah. So I don't know but then he got, so his first movie gig on paper was Vittorio De Sica, I think, was the director of Bicycle Thieves, which is a very popular old art house movie. And Leone was on the set for that. He was actually going to law school at this time, Leone. And he showed up on the set and wanted to be an extra. And the director goes, "Hey, if you can find 12 other people to be in the scene as an extra, I'll give you some money or I'll give you a job or something like that." Because he knew that Roberti was Leone's father. So he goes out and goes to his law school and gets 12 guys to come back in the rain and be extras. And then he was subsequently an assistant director on that movie, and they got more assistant directing gigs.
Leone was soon known in the Italian and even American film industry as a great assistant director who saved time and money. He worked for directors like Anthony Mann, Robert Wise, Fred Zinnemann, and even Orson Welles.
Yes, Fred Zinnemann, not to be confused with Fred Toast Crunch. So the most significant director that he worked for at the time was this guy, Mario Bernard. And he was actually living with him at one point because he was his assistant director on the movies, but also as just personal assistant, I think, in life also. And there's a funny story about that guy where they were on set one time and Leone was talking to the crowd going, here's what he needs you to do. The boat's going to go here or whatever. And the cinematography crew was setting up the shot, and Bernard was just drunk or impatient. He came on. He was like, "Leone, we're done. We're going to do the shot." He goes, "No, but he goes, shut up." And then he goes to the camera crew. He's like, "We're going to do the shot." And like, we haven't even, like, the focus is going to be. He's like, "Shut up, let's do it." So he goes, "And action." And he runs up on the platform. And he goes, "Look at me, everybody. I'm the boat. I'm the boat. Look at me. I'm the boat." And he wasn't looking where he was going. And he just walked off the platform and fell into the water. Oh, shit. And he also couldn't swim, so they all rush over. And he comes up for a second and goes, "Look at me, I'm an idiot." And then they all jumped in and got him. And so, yeah, that was interesting. But also the Orson Welles thing. I think the movie he worked on with Orson Welles was Othello. Because Orson Welles was never able to get funding in a mainstream or traditional way. He always had to like scrounge. He'd be like, "All right, I'll shoot this in France for a week, and then I'll go to the U.S. and film this scene because somebody gave me $2,000." It was so I think he worked with Orson Welles for a week shooting Othello, and then Fred Zinnemann he made a movie called The Nun Story. Anthony Mann, I forget, but then Anthony Mann later didn't like Leone's westerns, but also Anthony Mann was the director that Kubrick replaced on Spartacus.
How old was he during this time of his life?
He was born 1929, so he was about our age in the 1950s, if my math is correct, which it's usually not.
While filming The Last Days of Pompeii, director Mario Bernard fell ill, and Leone stepped in to complete the movie.
So this was significant because if this didn't happen, or if this didn't happen, it's possible that he would never have been a director, or it would have taken a lot longer. Because this was basically because he was actually going off and directing stuff himself at some points. Because the thing about assistant director or second unit director is they're basically the guy who has to shoot everything the main director doesn't want to do. So if the director's like, "I don't want to film this love scene or something, I don't give a shit," or I don't want to go film some exterior shots, some establishing shots. "Hey, you go and do this." So he was basically doing that. That's what James Cameron was doing. But here now he was able to show, like, "Look, I can do this whole thing," and that was significant because and also during this time, which was important, peplum movies, which is peplum, whatever. That's like a garment that people used to wear in the ancient times. And those movies were very big at the time. What they would do is they get a big strong man to be the head, and they would make like a Hercules movie or a whatever movie. There was this guy, Makiste, was a big star at the time. He was basically The Rock back then.
Nice.
Where he was just this big jack guy. And that was like the superhero movies of today.
Mm-hmm.
People I guess in Italy, but also in America, movies like Ben-Hur, Spartacus, and things like that. And he also, Sidney Lumet, Sergio Leone worked on Ben-Hur. He worked on the chariot race. And yeah, but those were falling out of fashion, which is important, which we'll get to when we talk about Fistful of Dollars. But he directed Last Days of Pompeii, and then that eventually opened the door for him to direct the Colossus of Rhodes.
Mm-hmm. Is there a reason why all these films were in Italy other than the fact that there was just Italian directors making it, or is there some weird reason that like Americans would go there to film?
Well, I'm sure it was the incentive monetarily was a big deal. Was cheaper, but also I think the Italian Hollywood was called Cinecittà. It was like Cinecitta. I think I was like, "Hey, Mom, how do you pronounce it?" She goes Cinecittà or Cinecittà. So it was basically essentially like Italian Los Angeles in a way.
Okay. The Colossus of Rhodes, 1961. The seed for the movie came when an Italian film director, Paolo Maffa, showed him an article in a magazine titled The Seven Wonders of the Ancient World.
Are you familiar with the Colossus of Rhodes?
Not really, no.
I just learned about it a year ago and went, what? Because I saw it in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, I think. And I'm like, no way they built that. Like, I saw it somewhere. And it's basically this 150-foot statue of this guy holding a big bowl or holding whatever. It's a little different in real life than it is in the movie. And it was built on this island, Rhodes. And then some earthquake came and kind of knocked it off. But it was the port of Rhodes was under the guy's two legs.
Yeah.
So all the boats would have to sail under the guy's legs.
Mm-hmm. So that was a real thing, though?
Yeah, it's like that. Fell? It's like that statue of Jesus in Brazil, I think.
Jesus.
It's just giant. What?
That's just the way the statue of Jesus. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. I didn't know that was a real thing.
I think the guys in I think there was a story in Christopher Frayling's book, which is behind us, which is something Sergio Leone, Something to Do with Death, which is a very good book. I'd recommend you get if you're more interested in Leone. But I think the producers of the movie weren't familiar with what the Colossus of Rhodes was. They thought it was maybe because I mentioned the big guys who were in all the Peplum movies back in the day. They thought the Colossus was a big guy. Then they're like, no, it's just some dumb statue. And they're like, God damn it! Well, we already started filming. So,
although Leone dismissed his work on the Last Days of Pompeii, the plot of the Colossus of Rhodes would share many similarities.
Yeah, he didn't take a directing credit. He went uncredited for his work on Last Days of Pompeii, even though I believe he directed most of the movie. But he was saying, I wasn't involved in the genesis of that project, so I don't consider it one of my movies, which is fair enough. But with the Last Days of Pompeii, the way that's similar to the Colossus of Rhodes is basically, all right, you have this guy, and he shows up in this place and goes, hey, I'm here, what's going on? And then there's an event that he goes, oh, there's some kind of underground revolution happening. And then it also takes place on this landmass that's famous for this cataclysmic event that takes place in the climax of the movie. In The Last Days of Pompeii, you can guess what a giant event is. I'm not going to tell you. And then in the Colossus of Rhodes, it's an earthquake that, rattle. And this basically is natural disaster that rocks this island. Mm-hmm. Not in a musical way, in a very much more violent and tragic way. So, yeah.
With an electric guitar.
Yeah, it's just Kiss.
Actor John Derek was cast in the lead role of Dario, but he and Leone quickly discovered that they didn't like each other.
They didn't like each other at all.
Hilarious.
So John Derek was a guy who was he had like the 6th billing on the 10 Commandments. So that was sort of a big deal because like, oh shit, we got a Hollywood guy.
Yeah.
And not like that was uncommon though. And the studio was very proud of that. But John Derek was also an aspiring director. So when he came out, and also Sergio Leone, this is his first movie, he's sort of an unproven guy. So John Derek was just coming on set going, hey, maybe we should do this shot, or maybe we should do
Okay.
this. And Leone was like, I'm the director, pal. There was one story where they weren't, they wanted to do an action scene, and John Derek was like, no, we should just do just improvise it, just do it on the day. And Leone's like, what? No, what are you talking? It's gonna look terrible.
Yeah.
And they did it, and he was just like,
Yeah,
it looked bad.
Anything.
And so then that caused some friction. And then there was another time where Leone was walking around set and he saw John Derek doing the director with his fingers thing, like making a frame with his fingers. And he was trying to. He goes, what are you doing, pal? And he goes, oh, I'm trying to see if we can get a shot that goes through these two columns to see if the camera would fit. And Sergio Leone goes, would the camera fit? And he goes, no, it won't. And he goes, why? He goes, the columns are too close together. And he goes, did you consider just moving the columns like a little bit farther away?
Oh my.
And then he goes, listen, pal, I'm the director. If I tell you to grow a beard, you grow a beard. If I want you to shave it because I changed my mind, you shave it, pal. If I want you to do, and then if I want you to put it back on, you put it back on.
you put that
I'm
beard-
sick of this shit. I'm not going to deal with this anymore. I'm calling the studio. If you're not off the movie tomorrow, I'm done.
Dang.
And then the John Derek was subsequently replaced with Rory Calhoun, who was just on honeymoon with his wife, I think, in Italy. And they're like, hey, want to be this lead? And he was like, nice,
Well,
dude.
I'm in
Yeah.
Italy. On August 25th, 1961, The Colossus of Rhodes was released in Italy and met with mixed to negative reviews. However, it became a box office success, grossing $657 million.
Million what?
Liar.
Liar? Lira?
Lira.
Or lira or liar? Whatever the
Don't
Italian...
start throwing Italian things in my face.
Whatever the old Italian currency is. Can you guess how much money that was to dollars back then?
657 million lira.
Yeah, guess how many...
To dollars, like $10 million.
It was about $360,000.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
So, then that was a big. That was like a good grossing movie. That was a successful movie at the time. I couldn't find anywhere like the budget figures, but I guess it'd be somewhere around maybe 50,000. I don't know. Actually, they didn't really talk about that in any of the other research I did. But Colossus of Rhodes is a movie where if you're a Sergio Leone completist or any director completist when you're going through all the movies, it's one of those movies that you're like, oh shit, I'm gonna have to watch that one, am I? And actually the first time I went through Leone's movies, I didn't even watch it. I'm like, I don't really care about that. I'm not gonna watch that. And then I watched it this time because I had to for the podcast, and I went in going like, all right, this is probably gonna be terrible, whatever. I don't give a shit. And then I went in, and the first hour was surprisingly compelling because I mean the first couple scenes is like, okay, it's like this thrown together staging and something. I'm like, okay, these characters or whatever, and then the whole revolution. Because usually I'm not really a fan of the revolutions in movies because it's not compelling me. Where like they do this in Blade Runner 2049 where a guy gets bonked on the head and then all of a sudden he's in this underground cave and there's just some guy start like lighting a cigar going, we're gonna start a revolution. Like that's not really that compelling to me. But in this, I thought it was gonna go. All right, Dario shows up to visit his uncle in Rhodes. And his uncle Rhodes like, this is awesome. There's it's peace here. There's no violence. And then somebody tries to kill the king, and he goes, well, there's your bloody violence. Am I right? And then obviously then that hints that there's like an underground revolution going on, and you're like, okay, so obviously the revolution's gonna want this guy to be a part because he's the protagonist. And usually how it goes is they court the protagonist, and they fight for a little. They punch for a bit. And then they go, hey, but seriously, listen, we need your help. And he goes, no, I don't want to do it. And then something happens, and he comes back and goes, all right, I want to do it now, right? But in this, once they get to the part where they fight, where they do the initial, like, who are you? What are you doing? Get out of here. They fight, and they fight for like 10 minutes. And it's a very compelling fight because they're actually hitting, it's obviously like kind of staged and choreographed, but there has weight to it, and there's some creativity where the Dario's uncle, he puts like cotton in his ears because there's a storm. So he's sleeping in his room, and in the background there's just a giant fight going on. And then they fight, and then the uncle wakes up and rings the bell, and the guards come, and the rebels have to go away. So now that whole thing, we're like, oh, I don't know how is he going to join the rebellion now? I don't know how this is going to go. And he never really joins the rebellion until it hits what I thought was the third act. And basically at the end of the first hour, I'm like, oh, so maybe I'm like an hour and 20 in, and this is the third act now. Now he's with the rebellion. They're gonna go another 30 minutes and we're done. And I checked the thing, and we had like an hour 10 minutes. So I was like, well, shit. And then that turned into the part that I was initially regretting, where I'm like, oh shit, I'm gonna have to sit through this now. There is some funny stuff in it where all the especially the protagonist is wearing a very, very short tunic. And there's a scene where he chases this hot girl up the stairs, and you can just see, you can't see anything, but it's just funny how you could see his under bottom.
Yeah, it's just like too much showing for it.
It's
They
very
could've just
silly.
made it a little longer
Yeah,
or
yeah.
something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, all the outfits from those movies are like a somewhat goofy, I feel like.
Yeah,
right?
and it's just full of people who've never worked out in their life either. So they're
Yeah.
like, look at that one, he's big and strong. And it's just like
Like
you walk into a band class in high school, and that you find that guy. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting about the Colossus of Rhodes though is because Leone talked about how he goes Homer was the greatest writer. And he talks about how myths like Achilles or whatever mythical stuff that I can't think about right now, those archetypes exist throughout our entire culture and our most popular entertainment. And what he later did was attribute that kind of same idea of mythic archetypes in his westerns.
Mm-hmm.
And in this, he's basically working in the same time period, in the same genre and sort of time and place where those myths occurred. And I think maybe this obviously it's hard because this isn't a very developed movie because it was just a B swords and sandals movie that was being made cheaply. But I think maybe he bit off more than he can chew by directly attacking this mythic thing rather than doing it in some kind of abstracted way like he did in the westerns, if that makes sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he just went straight for it, and it might not have hit as much as he probably would have hoped it did.
And that's not saying that the movie's particularly ambitious. There's some good scale stuff with the actual Colossus of Rhodes in the background. Like there's shots where people are walking around, you can see the Colossus of Rhodes in the background. Like that looks very good.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a good scene that's a nod to the climax on Mount Rushmore in Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest, where they're on top of the Colossus of Rhodes. And also it's supposed to be like the Statue of Liberty. Like it's a symbol of our freedom, but then you find out that the whole thing is basically a political prison, which historically is inaccurate. It's like an anachronism or whatever, but if that's the right word. But story-wise, it's actually kind of compelling. And there's a scene where they're at the top and they go, "We got you, buddy, you're dead." And then he climbs out of the ear of the Colossus of Rhodes and starts running around on the shoulders and like fighting guys and kicking them off. And that's pretty cool. There's some funny stuff that I wrote down in my notes that I'm going to bring up.
Mm-hmm.
There's a scene where it doesn't really work. So they find out that if they press a button, they go, "Well, listen to this, pal. We just discovered what catapults are." There's a guy inventing the catapult. He goes,
Like,
"Dude, look
as
at this."
it's going on.
He goes, "What should we call this? A dogapult? No."
Okay.
Somebody is like, "Oh,
Okay.
a kitty pult? No,
No,
but close. We're getting
not
closer."
working for me.
But then what they do is there's all the rebellion guys are at the bottom and they're overtaking the regime, and the guy presses a button and the crown of the Colossus opens up and the head opens up and they start hurling a bunch of molten like mercury at these guys. But it's funny because when you look at it in the big bowl, there's a button and it reveals this big bowl of molten shit, and it looks like it just looks it's funny because it's an Italian production, but it just looks like a big bowl of tomato sauce. And it's like it doesn't look like it's hot at all. It just looks like somebody's bubbling it up. And it's just like
it's ready to
just
be
50
eaten.
can of tomato sauce. Like maybe that just doubled as the caterer.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
It literally just looks like it doesn't look hot. It looks ready to eat.
Yeah.
Like, it's the
Just looks
perfect-
so tasty.
You're just like,
And then they
"Oh."
start dumping on everybody, and it's clearly something else. Like everybody's gets hit with smoke, and they're like, "Oh, this, you know."
Was there anything in these movies or in this movie specifically that, once you get to Once Upon a Time in the West, is there anything in this that hinted that he was headed in that direction?
There for somebody who's a Leone completist, there is some interesting shots.
Mm-hmm.
There's one where he goes into this underground thing where he's trying to chase where he's chasing the hot girl. It's the shot after you can see up his butt, and he goes down there and sees basically the dynasty of Rhodes, of all the generations. They're all mummified against the wall, and there's this cool 360 shot that he does across the whole set, which is interesting that he didn't have to do. There's a shot of it's a small little thing, but there's the guy who's about to assassinate the king looks at one of the rebellion girls that you get to know later, and then the camera moves to her and then back to him. I can't really explain it that well, which is pretty interesting. Give me 1 second, and I'm going to look at my notes to see if there's anything funny left in Colossus of Rhodes before we move.
What happened with Sodom and Gomorrah?
Oh, so that's a movie he directed afterwards, or no, he didn't direct it. So he there was and like there was a period where he couldn't really get that much work, which we'll get to in the next segment. But he went back to his second unit directing or assistant directing for Robert Aldrich, who was an American director that he liked very much. And on that set, he quickly found out that Aldrich wasn't as smart and put together as he thought he was, and that movie ended up being a giant disaster and went completely over budget. There was Robert Aldrich recounts that he told Leone to go film these scenes, and Leone was like, "All right, got it." And then Aldrich visited the set one day, and they were in the middle of like a 3-hour lunch break, and they hadn't gotten anything all day, and he was really pissed. And then according to him, he says he fired Leone, and then according to Leone said he left. And there's a story that has nothing to do with Leone that's just interesting, where they were in the desert and they were filming this giant marching sequence, and the first time they shot it, all the dust you couldn't even see anybody because everybody was kicking up so much dust. So then they had to reshoot. They brought about a bunch of water and got like gallons and gallons of water into the desert, which cost so much money, and then they immediately evaporated.
It's like evaporating,
and so they're like,
as
God
you're
damn it.
throwing it.
Yeah,
Like going
exactly. And then so what they did is they had a mix of oil and water that lasted 3 hours instead of 3 minutes, and they eventually got the shot. But it was just like a giant,
Yeah, it's just a mess.
colossal. And that movie came out bombed and it sucked.
A Fistful of Dollars, 1964. The genesis of A Fistful of Dollars came during an 18-month period of low employment for Leone, when a cameraman/future director, Enzo Barboni, recommended Leone see Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo.
Enzo Barboni would later direct They Call Me Trinity, and Trinity Is Still My Name, I believe. I think he directed those. Trinity Is Still My Name eventually outgrossed for a few dollars more to become the highest-grossing Italian movie of all time. Those were other spaghetti westerns that were, I think, in the early 70s, maybe. So for anybody watching on YouTube who is confused at why I'm wearing this hat, it's the closest thing I had to a cowboy hat, and I might take it off soon because it's really hard to sit in this chair and I have to hunch over. So the Peplum movies that we were talking about, those were going out of style. Shut up! I'm trying to adjust my hat. Those were going out of style, and they were kind of dying off, like the Western kind of died off. The subsequent years, and the Italian industry was really in a depression where I think, let's say in 1953, the total box office revenue in Italy was, let's say, $1 billion or a billion lire, and in 1961 it was significantly less. Let's say like 600 million instead of $1 billion. So the Italian film industry was in a depression. And the Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo thing is interesting because that speaks to maybe a thing we'll do in a later episode one day about how I don't know when I haven't seen Yojimbo, so I don't know when exactly it occurs in Japan's history. But post-feudal Japan and the Wild West are basically very similar time periods where the samurai were basically these disbanded warriors that really had no way in life except to be a hired sword. Just like the gunslingers of the Wild West were basically hired guns and stuff like that. And so they're also this moment in the country's history where they're in this land that's so open and free, and there's no touch of civilization anywhere, really. And that's just interesting, and I wanted to touch on that. Yes.
I like how Yojimbo comes into this because I saw Clint Eastwood, when he was asked to be on this, he didn't want to do a Western. He was thinking like, what is that going to be good for? And Sergio Leone basically told him, think like Yojimbo. Right. And Clint Eastwood had seen Yojimbo and was like, oh, that's awesome.
That's
actually.
pretty good.
I'm in. He wanted to be in after he realized that they were just going to take Yojimbo and make it into a Western.
Yeah.
So he was like, oh, that's cool.
And so immediately when he saw it, Carla Leone, who was Leone's wife, said he was just immediately committed to making it as a remake.
Leone originally wanted Henry Fonda, Charles Bronson, and James Coburn to play the titular character of the Magnificent Stranger.
So James Coburn, Charles Bronson, and Henry Fonda would actually end up being in Leone's movies later down the line in Once Upon a Time in the West and Duck You Sucker. And the way that Eastwood kind of was factored into it is because Eastwood was just on Rawhide. He wasn't a big star yet. He was a regular on Rawhide, and he was sort of the lead of a few episodes every season. But he had a contract where he couldn't do any American movies. He could only do Rawhide in America. I don't know if it was American TV, but he couldn't do any American movies. So when the prospect of doing a Italian movie came up, I'm sure he had his apprehensions, but the thing that ultimately convinced him was, okay, well, the way I see it, I can't do any other movies, so I might as well do this, make $15,000 and have a nice vacation in Italy, and I'll probably never hear this movie ever again.
Yeah, which is so funny that he actually just, because he talks about that, he talks about how he did the movie and it was named something else. Actually,
it was The Magnificent Stranger.
Oh, okay, The Magnificent Stranger, and he's like, he just was like, I wonder whatever happened with that movie.
Yeah,
which is hilarious.
Later when it came out, he saw a blurb in like a magazine saying A Fistful of Dollars, this great movie, and it's been making waves in Italy. And he's like, oh, nice. And then he saw it starring Clint Eastwood. He's like, what? That's the movie? But also Leone didn't want him because he wanted Fonda, James Coburn, and also Jason Robards was offered the role as well, who played Cheyenne in Once Upon a Time in the West. But the thing that ultimately convinced them, they had a screening of an episode of Rawhide, and Leone was like, all right, fine, I guess. But also James Coburn was close, but he was close to getting the part, but he wanted $25,000, and that was too expensive, and Eastwood just wanted $15,000, so they hired Eastwood.
Production got underway on a shoestring budget. The filming was so hectic that at one point, Eastwood quit the project.
So it's hectic because it's an Italian crew filming in Spain, and it's also financed by Germans or something like that. And nobody speaks any English, and Eastwood's just like, sure, you want me to? Okay, I'll do. Yep, sure. Like everybody's kind of just like sort of miming their way through this movie. How is this working? And there was one point where it was so hot every day, and Eastwood had to do his makeup had to get his makeup put on for the scene after he gets beat up, and he needs to have all this shit, and took him like a few hours to put it on, and he goes out there and nobody's there, and something with the scheduling of the set or some money. I know there was a point in the production where the financiers pulled out and they didn't have any money, and then somebody had to go across country lines, across like a country border, carrying 15 million lire or whatever. But Eastwood came out and there was nobody there, and he got really pissed off at Leone that they weren't ready to do the scene, and he said, "That's it, I'm out of here." And he went to the airport. Dang. And Leone caught him at the airport. Was like, "Hold on." He romantic comedied him at the end.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Can you imagine Sergio just being like, "Please, Clint." They just kissed him.
Clint Eastwood
like,
just dressed up.
I'll do 2 more movies.
Clint Eastwood just like, I'm
he
leaving.
Still has the makeup on.
No, this is what he'd be like, I'm leaving, but I'm keeping the cloak. Just keeps like on
the poncho. Well, the poncho. So a lot of the stuff, there's some discrepancy that's got lost in history. But he says the hat he brought from Rawhide, and he had some boots that he brought from Rawhide, and also a gun. And he also claims some other stuff with the poncho, but then somebody else is like, no, the poncho was my idea.
Dang.
Or whatever.
Dang.
So there's some discrepancy.
We got to get to the bottom of whose idea was the poncho.
Yeah, we got to change the title. Instead of The Life and Films of Sergio Leone, it's The Life and Films of that fucking poncho.
That poncho. It's a legendary poncho, I'll tell you.
But also, Eastwood was like, he goes, when they were working so hard, and then they would just have like 2 or 3 hour lunches because Sergio would love to eat. And would just eat all the time. And it's, so that he goes that we would, we were super into this filming, and then we'd take a 3 hour lunch break, and then the rest of the day we would just be filming in slow motion. We were so sluggish.
Around the time of release, A Fistful of Dollars got caught up in a litigation lawsuit with Akira Kurosawa.
So what happened is when they were going to make the movie, Leone didn't plagiarize the movie. He didn't go, I'm going to get away with this. He went, nice, this is going to be an official remake of Yojimbo, right? Because the producers, I think their names were like Poppy and Scully, I don't know. And I forget their names. Well, I think it's in the next section we'll find out who those guys are. They told him, yeah, we can get the rights. It's only $10,000 for the rights. Don't even worry about it, pal. And then they just never got the rights. And so they're in post-production, and Leone gets this letter from Akira Kurosawa saying, I just saw your film, A Fistful. Oh, no, it was after it was released because Akira Kurosawa saw it.
Yeah.
He goes, I just saw your film, A Fistful of Dollars, and it was an excellent film. It was a very fine film, but it is my film, and I would like to seek the financial compensation for it.
Damn.
So Leone had this letter, and he brought it to the office. He brought it to the producers and everything. He's like, Akira Kurosawa, he wrote to me. He said it was a very fine film. And they had to be like, Sergio, this isn't good.
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
this is going to cost a lot of money.
We're
and
fucked.
yeah, it's just really good. And then Akira Kurosawa said that he made more money off of A Fistful of Dollars than any other movie in his career.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So if he would have gotten the rights for like $10,000, he probably would have he wouldn't have made.
He would have gotten like a small paycheck maybe.
On September 12th, 1964, A Fistful of Dollars was released in Italy and met with mixed initial reviews. However, it slowly but surely became a box office hit, eventually grossing nearly $20 million over its first years of release.
So the critics initially were just saying, what? This is just trying to do an American movie or American Western. It's trying to recapture that. What is it doing? And they weren't really sure about it. And then it played in this one shitty theater, which according to Leone was like rat infested, and it was all shitty in the windows. There was light coming through the windows or whatever. And then it opened, and then on let's say Sunday it made 100,000, right? And then on Monday it made 300,000, which is not how it works. It's the weekend. There's always a Sunday to Monday drop, but it went up, and they were like, "What is going on?" And then it just kept increasing day to day. And it eventually just took off, and from sheer word of mouth, was this big hit. And also they retitled it from The Magnificent Stranger to Fistful of Dollars, which is way better. The Magnificent Stranger sounds like if a 15-year-old had like a first script.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? No offense to 15-year-olds, but
that's like hearing him change it to A Fistful of Dollars from The Magnificent Stranger.
Yeah,
kind of makes me think, why didn't he change Duck You Sucker?
We'll get to that. That wasn't his decision. But it's also, the Magnificent Stranger also has sort of, a lineage to another Akira Kurosawa movie, Seven Samurai, which inspired the Magnificent Seven, which basically set the precedent for, American Westerns based off of Japanese movies and vice versa.
Yeah.
But also Yojimbo is based off an American book.
Was it? Jesus.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah.
And that book was based off of
that book was,
a Netflix
but
series.
that book was also written by a Japanese guy.
No.
It's like, what? No, I'm kidding. That's not true.
I'm like, where did we start? No, okay. So I haven't seen Yojimbo.
Yeah.
If I go watch Yojimbo, is it like beat for beat?
It's not beat for beat, okay, to my knowledge, to what I've heard. The premise, it's just, the only thing that they got from it is that the premise of this: a stranger comes to town and puts these two gangs at war with each other. And the reason I like Fistful of Dollars is because it has, obviously it has it's like when you watch it and you go, oh, okay, this is Sergio Leone, but it's him just figuring out what he can do. Yeah. So for example, it's like a primitive precursor to For a Few Dollars More, Good, the Bad, the Ugly, and the rest of his filmography, where obviously he's most famous for those big, lingering, giant sequences that are just people's close-ups and faces and with music. Yeah. And in this, it has that as well, but it's way more unpolished and rough around the edges. And so, for example, the first time that occurs, I think, is the scene where Antonio. They have Antonio Baxter that they captured at the graveyard, and then they have the woman Consuela, I think her name is. The Rojos gang has her, or maybe vice versa. No, the Baxters have Consuela, and the Rojos have Antonio, and they're going to do a prisoner swap, and they're doing it across, and everybody's in town is watching, and then we see everybody's close-ups and tensions are high, and then all of a sudden that boy goes, "Mama!" and he sees the mom, and the mom sees him, and then her eyes go to the kid, and then the kid's eyes go to her, Clint Eastwood's eyes go to them, the Rojos' eyes go around, and you get the dynamic of what's going on just from essentially just the close-ups. And I think that's Leone discovering, like, wait a minute, I can kind of, let me push, because there's a conventional way to shoot that, and I think while he was shooting it, he kind of discovered it, and was like, all right, let me just push this a little bit. And that's when he discovered it.
Yeah, when he discovers just lingering in that moment of somebody's face is just so, Yeah, it makes all those moments a lot heavier when you see their face, and that's another thing I want to get into with the faces in all of these films. They're just so dirty, and
he's good at. Clint Eastwood said he's good at picking the most memorable faces. Yeah, especially for a few dollars more. Every face that we see in that movie is insane. You're just like, well, I've never seen that guy before.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Because you see every line on their face.
Yeah.
And it's just so distinctive. Each person has so many distinctive lines on their face, which
Yeah.
you know.
Well, the poetic thing that people usually say is that a Sergio Leone close-up works the same way as a big sweeping landscape shot where you're seeing the landscape of this person's face and stuff.
Yeah, that's good.
And like this, in the same way where the way he uses close-ups and edits those together gets better as we get through this trilogy. It happens the same with the Man with No Name's character, who does have 3 names over the course of these movies, mind you.
Yeah.
In this movie, he's Joe, and I think Leone realized for a few dollars more, okay, the less we know about this character, the better. Because in this movie, I believe he has probably the most dialogue. He's the most talkative, and they try to do that hint of a backstory that maybe they felt like they needed at this time.
Yeah.
Because he does so. The whole thing about him is that he's a very mysterious guy, and we don't really see him talk. But then in this, of course he's very talkative. But then there's that scene where he goes, and they go, "Why are you doing this?" And he goes, "Well, I just think you remind me of somebody I once knew or something like that."
Mm-hmm.
And like mechanically, for any other traditional character, like as a traditional character beat, it works. But for this character, I'd rather not even know, because I like the intrigue and the mystery, because his character has this sort of ethereal presence. I think a little bit. It's like a soft allusion to an ethereal presence, where because Sergio Leone talked about he wanted him to be sort of like an incarnation of the angel Gabriel.
Yeah.
And I saw that, and I'm like, that's interesting because he does have this. I don't know how to explain it. It's very soft. These hints. I'm not saying that this explains the whole movie, but we don't really see him sleep at all. And he goes, you should get some sleep. And he's like, no, I'm thinking. His eyes are wide open. Mm-hmm. And then when he gets beat up, he leaves town in a coffin. And when he comes back, he has that piece of metal on his chest, and he's getting shot at. Mm-hmm. And the way he gets shot at is like if they're going right through him, essentially. Like he's not getting affected by them, let's say. And that sets up like he's this maybe supernatural or paranormal guy, like that, because how mysterious and good he is, or whatever. And I'm not saying that's a very hard and tangible interpretation. It's just this weird, vague idea that I felt.
Yeah, I mean that can make sense too with how calculated he is with everything.
Yeah,
it seems like that character gets into a lot of positions where anyone else throughout all these movies, anyone else would be totally screwed.
Yeah,
but just the calming presence of how chill he is throughout the whole thing. You never get the sense, like you still feel the tension, but you never get the sense that he doesn't have a plan.
Yeah, and
to fall back on.
And the idea that described like him being this ghostly presence over the story it has this same exact feeling, and it feels like it's extrapolated on more in another Clint Eastwood western that he directed, which I'm not going to name for spoiler purposes. But if you know what movie I'm talking about, you know what movie I'm talking about. And also I talked about the faces, and I think part of him discovering that was probably that Clint Eastwood just happened to have one of the best stares ever, and was like, "Oh, wait a minute, there's something going on here." That probably helped a lot. Maybe if he didn't work with Clint Eastwood and didn't realize that he had such a great stare that he can just use, because it almost works the same way. Have you seen that video where I haven't seen the new Halo series, off the video game, but when you watch the game, and Cortana says something tragic to Master Chief, and they just cut to his face, his helmet, and you just see the helmet.
Yeah.
And you, the audience, I think it worked because you, the audience, are projecting what you're feeling onto him. And suddenly you're attributing an emotion to just this mask that doesn't move, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's much more powerful than in the clip I saw of the TV show where he takes his helmet off and he's like, you know what I mean? And I think the same thing happens with Clint Eastwood's face, where he's never really cueing you into what's going on internally with his character. He's just going, ugh.
Yeah.
And it works so well because it has that same kind of effect on the audience.
Yeah, it doesn't really have an emotion. It just has inward thought to it. For a few dollars more, 1965. After the success of Fistful of Dollars, Leone considered making the first script he wrote while he was 19 titled Vile Glorioso.
So there's a story I forgot to mention when we were talking about Fistful of Dollars. It's funny that I'll get to really quick. So when they were filming, there's a shot where the man with no name, Joe, who has a name, rides past this tree, and there's a noose on the tree. And Leone wanted that shot, but they're in the middle of the desert, and they're like Sergio, there's no tree. What are you talking about? There's no trees. He goes, screw you, and he gets in a car, just starts driving around, and he finds a tree. He went to this guy's house, and there was a dead tree on this guy's property that he just wanted. And so instead of doing it properly, he just had the crew go there one day and went, hey, we're with the State Department with the highway. This is a danger to everybody. We gotta really take this out. And some old guy being like, huh?
Yeah.
And he just like watches them like, as they take it. They just chopped it down and took it. He's like, all right, whatever. That was weird, which is funny. Okay. What did you say? I forgot. Oh, so Valley Glorioso, yeah. So he wanted to make that, but there was Fellini made a movie. I think it was Le Vittori, something like that. I don't know the names. And that was basically another one of like the nostalgia movie, like The Fabelmans or something like that, like the director's childhood. And he said Fellini already sort of did that, so he didn't know if that would be a very interesting movie to make for the time.
Mm-hmm.
And also there was pressure for him as well from studios to make another Western because Fistful of Dollars was so successful. But he also considered doing a remake because he's like, all right, this remake of movies from other countries maybe turns out pretty well. Let me do Fritz Lang's M from, I think it was 1931. That was essentially the first serial killer movie. And my dad talks about it all the time. Like at the time, that's like a kind of a big deal. This guy's murdering, I think, kids he murders in the movie. I'm not sure. I haven't seen it, but I've seen all of Fritz Lang's silent movies. M was Fritz Lang's first talkie movie, and I haven't seen it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but he's gonna have Klaus Kinski be in that. He was the Hunchback for a few dollars more.
Okay.
He's also in the Big Silence by Sergio Corbucci. Sergio Corbucci actually worked with Leone when they were doing assistant. He worked on The Last Days of Pompeii, and he did his own spaghetti westerns that were also very important. I don't know much about him. I haven't seen any of his movies, but I know he's sort of what would you call it? He's I guess a contemporary of Sergio Leone.
Mm-hmm. Producers Poppy and Colombo.
That's it.
Offered Leone 30% of Fistful profits, which he turned down after not liking the experience with working with them.
Because obviously Fistful of Dollars went really well, but after the whole thing with Yojimbo and not getting the rights to properly remake that, he was kind of like, buzz off.
Yeah.
I don't really, that was kind of a shitty thing to do. So what he did is I think he went with, was it Alberto Grimaldi?
Mm-hmm.
And he set up a deal with him. Alberto Grimaldi, I believe, was a lawyer who wanted to get into movies. And he set up a deal where he goes, hey, let's do this next movie. You'll get 50% of the profits. And Leone was like, nice. And just to spite Poppy and Colombo, he named the movie for a few dollars more. So it was a direct sequel. Sort of a direct sequel to Fistful of Dollars, saying like, I'm making this movie without you guys.
Yeah,
buzz off.
Cool. It's baller.
Yeah,
pretty Western of him, honestly.
Pretty Wiki Wild West.
Mm-hmm. But I like that. We kind of talked about this a little bit. How these are. It is a trilogy, but it's also not a trilogy in a way.
Yeah,
right?
It's an anthology, so there's more free. We'll get to this later when we get to our overall thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot more freedom. Because you tell me about Star Wars. What do you always say?
Star Wars is like tied down by its past movies.
Yeah.
Basically, you can't do anything. You can't. If you want to give somebody a cool lightsaber, somebody's gonna be there and be like, "Wait, hold on.
Actually,
how did he get that lightsaber?" Because in this,
yeah.
It's like you can't make any creative choices at this point.
Right, but when you have an anthology, you're much more
just free.
Yeah.
And again, Leone originally wanted Henry Fonda, Charles Bronson, and Lee Marvin.
So he wanted those guys to play Douglas Mortimer, which ultimately went to Lee Van Cleef. They all turned it down. Lee Van Cleef was cast the day before shooting. Oh my gosh. So what happened with him is he was an actor who was very I think his first role was he was one of the guys in High Noon by Fred Zinnemann, not Cinnamon Toast Crunch. And he was always sort of like a background guy in westerns because he had a mean face, but he never had a leading role. And eventually, I forget. I think Leone saw him in a magazine somewhere. Saw a picture of him somewhere. It was like, that's the face I need. That's crazy. I'm gonna get that guy. So he called him up, and he was sort of recently in the last couple of years or month got in a car accident, and he couldn't run, and he had trouble getting up and on horses and stuff, and so physically he was kind of restricted a little bit, but they signed everything and he agreed to be in the movie, and he had to take the red-eye flight over to Italy. and as soon as he landed, like just had to start shooting.
Oh my god.
So he literally just went on a plane, drove to the set, and started,
Mm-hmm.
and which is pretty interesting. And he ended up killing it.
On December 18th, 1965, For a Few Dollars More was released in Italy and became the biggest movie in Italian history. It received even better reviews than Fistful of Dollars, eventually making $25 million in its initial worldwide release.
So A Fistful of Dollars made, let's say, 4.8, I think was the number, $1 million in Italy, and For a Few Dollars More made above 5, I think, I believe, or maybe it was 4.5 for A Few Dollars More, and then 3.8 for Fistful of Dollars, somewhere around there. It's around that number, and I think we're talking about this being an anthology sequel. And on our James Cameron podcast, which you can watch, which we did a couple of weeks ago, you can go watch. We talked about, because obviously James Cameron is one of the best guys at doing sequels, and the key to doing a sequel is sort of taking the premise from the first one and adding a twist on it, so that you can see everything in a new way, and it kind of opens up the movie and opens up the premise. And in this, they do that brilliantly, and they do it almost doubly brilliantly because you don't have to adhere to the chronology of the previous movie. Because since it's an anthology, you can sort of just take the concepts from the first one and massage them to however you want. So now in this one, basically we have the man with no name, or Joe, as a bounty hunter, right? But we have that character, and what throws a monkey wrench into the whole movie is now, because it was very satisfying to see Clint Eastwood in that movie outsmart both of those gangs. It's very hard. It's also very hard to mess up somebody being very intelligent in a movie. It's either very easy or very hard to mess up, or very easy to get right, is just showing somebody outsmarting people. And he does that a lot in Fistful of Dollars. But here, Clint Eastwood basically not only has to outsmart the villain, who's essentially an evil version of himself, because Indio, who I think might be the best villain out of all the Dollars trilogy, is very intelligent. And Douglas Mortimer is also another one of the man with no names that he has to contend with.
Yeah.
So now there's an extra tension. There's a tension between Clint Eastwood and Indio, but there's also I'm just gonna call him Clint Eastwood. Yeah. But there's also a tension between Clint Eastwood and Mortimer because they're competing. So you have this triangle of intelligent, super skilled guys, and they have to all outsmart each other. And I think it's such a strong idea.
And you also get the sense that Mortimer, they allude to this, Mortimer's older and more experienced than Clint Eastwood.
Yes. So it's sort of a battle between, instinct and freewheelingness and being very careful and calculated and stuff. And they basically have to deal with an evil version of themselves in Indio.
Yeah. And I love the etiquette of the men in these movies. Like, they set up an etiquette between everyone, where it's not like nobody's gonna shoot you in the back. Nobody's gonna shoot. Like, if you're gonna shoot someone, it's gonna be, I want you 20 feet that way and looking straight at me.
You can't just surprise it. I literally just can't go boom.
Yeah. Nobody does that. And just like the scene where they're talking. Do you want to get into some scenes?
Yeah. Go ahead.
The scene where they're talking about, or where they finally confront each other. And
Mortimer and Joe, Monco. In this movie is Monco.
And they just kind of like shoot each other's hats.
Yeah.
And you're like,
and that might be the closest Leone's ever got to like outright silliness. I'm not saying it is silly, and I think it works and it's a good scene. But the way that they're so good that he's throwing the hat up, it's very almost like a parody.
Yeah,
it's the closest that he ever got to those kind. There's a movie called I think Trinity. My Name is, or They Call Me Trinity, was also a spoof on the Western, and it's sort of like a precursor to that. My Name is Nobody was also sort of a spoof, I think.
And it's also a good way to bring you to a high moment of tension where you're thinking, oh, is something going to happen right here between these two now? And then they kind of break the tension by just like doing the hat thing. Yeah. And then it cuts to their drinking. And you're like, oh, this guy's not as bad as I thought. Right. But there's still a little bit of tension between them because they
don't really trust each other.
Yeah. They definitely don't trust each other.
And that scene is perfect, and it highlights something else that he does in this movie, where that scene when they're punching each other and stepping in each other's boots, there's no dialogue.
Yeah.
And that's the thing where because the scope of this movie, this movie gets bigger in every way, and it gets more polished and much more refined. but it doesn't lose any of its subtlety. It actually increases in subtlety because, like we talked about in Fistful of Dollars, it's not that subtle when he goes, you just remind me of somebody I know, and that's why I helped you. It's not that subtle, but it works. But in this, the way we get a hint of a character having a backstory, they don't ascribe it to the man with no name. And that's one of the pluses of Mortimer being in the movie, is because now we can have an emotional foundation to the movie that doesn't have to ruin with the mysteriousness of Monco. You can ascribe it to Mortimer. And the way Leone just uses visuals and music to communicate that the flashbacks that Indio has been having about of raping that woman and her killing herself and killing the husband is somehow connected with him through, because he has the pocket watch and Monco's like, hey, what's that? And he's just, shut up, don't worry about it. And then later we see Indio has the same pocket watch playing the same music, and he's playing it, and then Monco, Clint Eastwood, takes it and plays the music, and that's what cues us in to Mortimer having that connection, right? I think that is. Does that make sense? I think that's brilliant. It's fantastic. There's no dialogue. It's this purely emotional moment, and that's occurring at the time where they're all doing the close-ups as well. And there's a motivation behind that flashback. There's no bullshit thing of Douglas Mortimer holding the gun at Indio and Indio going, who are you? He goes, you don't remember me? And then Indio goes, door. And then it does that dreamy flashback to them. There's a direct visual motivation to the flashback that Leone uses a lot, maybe his best and most subtle in Once Upon a Time in America, that he uses like 12 times in that.
Yeah, there is a lot of moments in his films where you could get that ultimate satisfaction of the character being like, you don't remember me, but they don't do that. They just like again with the etiquette of the men, like they won't ever just be like that. They just stare at each other. Shoot. They'd rather just shoot and just let it handle itself, basically, with the outcome of the draw, basically.
Yeah, or even in that sequence, Clint Eastwood he's not part of the climax. Monco's not part of the climax because he just stands by and goes, listen, I can't help you. He goes, I'll set up this duel, but you're on your own. You have to defeat him. That's like a weird. That's a weird. Again, etiquette. I'm not saying it's bad or good. It's just interesting. That's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I like that in all the films though. That it comes to that instead of just your basic.
Because I'm sure in real life that's not how it worked at all. These are the dirtiest, most toughest, smarmy people probably in real life.
I thought about what it must have been like growing up watching these movies and thinking in my head as a little kid or something, just being like, well, this is how I have to act.
Yes. I want to act like this so much, because I saw a post once and it was like, I want to be dark and mysterious, but I literally can't shut up.
Yeah. I want to be Clint Eastwood's character, but...
But also, like, it's funny because everything works out for him. I'm always like, why don't I act like this? And I'm like, because nothing will ever work out this way. Like, I'll look like an idiot at some point. It's impossible to not look like an idiot. But the no dialogue thing I was talking about before, there's a great sequence. It's like, how do you communicate the idea of, let's find out if these guys are here to do a robbery? Because I know somebody's about to do a robbery. How do I find out if these guys are involved in a gang? Took me like 2 sentences to describe that, right? In this movie, we see Mortimer go in the bar, and he sees these suspicious-looking guys, and he goes up to Klaus Kinski, who's the hunchback, and he lights his cigarette on his suspenders, like just provoking him. And he goes like, "You son of a bitch!" And his friends are like, "Hey, we can't," because they know that if they cause a ruckus in town, it's going to draw attention to them. They won't be able to rob the bank. And they have this whole thing where he's just trying to get something out of them, and that's such a brilliant and smart way to show their motivations and what they're going to do, and also just communicate knowledge passing from one character to another. It's so smart. They do kind of reinforce it later, even subtly. They go, I think, what's the line? The bartender says, he must have had a good reason not to hit you.
Yeah, and he's like, I know.
Yeah, which is like, which is still doing through dialogue, but it doesn't hit. It's not heavy-handed in the dialogue. Oh my God, they must be robbing a bank or something.
Yeah. Well, there's another scene where he goes to the bank, and he asks, "What's the biggest bank around here?"
Oh yes, that's so good. And the guy gulps.
He like closes the thing.
Yeah.
It's just a smart way of them, that showing how smart that character is to just find certain ways to know what they're doing next, and to know that he can go up to them in the bar and know that he's not going to shoot him because they don't want to make a scene because they're in town to rob the bank. So the way he does it is by provoking them, and if they don't do anything, that's the guy that they want, basically.
This is basically, except for I think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is probably more. I mean, Once Upon a Time in America is some ways Leone's most silent era film movie, and this is the most visual movie, if that makes sense. Because it doesn't feel like a silent movie in the conventional sense, but this feels like. Okay, so for example, I talked about the faces that he discovered in Fistful of Dollars. He takes that a step further with the scene with the bounty hunter that put him in jail in the church. That first standoff that they have with them. Also, the music is fantastic in this movie, Ennio Morricone.
All of them.
And they had the showdown. That's the first. That's like the first proper Leone stare down that with the close-ups that I feel like we have in his filmography. And then the second is, of course, the climax. But even like the bank, when they rob the bank, there's no quips or like there's no "we got company." There's no character saying anything. You just see Mortimer and Monco, watching from the windows in the streets, and they're just giving each other looks. And the guards are walking around the bank, and and then all of a sudden they just give each other looks like, where are these guys?
Yeah.
And then we just see them. It's so brilliant. Like there's no hand holding through the whole movie. Also, I just want to take a second to mention how I love the opening credit scenes in all three of these movies.
Oh, yeah.
How they each have their whole thing. Obviously, that you liked a lot the opening in Fistful of Dollars with the rotoscoping and stuff. And this, they have just I think it's Clint Eastwood's character who shoots the guy from a distance, and then the credits just hold on him, and they're getting fired away. Which is what convinced Eli Wallach to do The Good and the Bad and the Ugly, because Leone just showed him the opening credits to a few dollars more, so he's like, oh shit, I'll do the movie. And then when The Good and the Bad and the Ugly, it has that cool. I don't even know what it was. I don't even know what you would call it design wise, but those were awesome as well. And also, we talked about the Mortimer's opening in this and how it's 12-second. First of all, and also the guy we see on the train. We're talking about the faces before. The guy we see on the train who goes, "Hey, this train ain't stopping at Tucumcari."
Yeah.
And that guy's face, you're like, who looks like that? Except that guy.
Yeah. The most badass thing, he goes, "You can't get off here," or something. He goes, "I just got off."
Yeah. He goes, "I already did."
This guy's bad.
Yeah. When he comes off
just
the train.
the way he acts, but I feel like that speaks to how it's super visual. So him just saying "I just did," there's no fat on that whole conversation. There's nothing of fat. He just says "I just did," and he can tell by his demeanor. The guy's just like, "All right, let's get this train going. Let's get out of here."
And I don't want to make it seem like I hate dialogue or anything, because Leone's movies have a very, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, they have a very childish and juvenile energy. That's like, no, but this is fun. This is entertaining. This is cool. But he also does say things in his movies in a serious intellectual way, maybe politically, maybe not, and which we'll get to in Duck You Sucker. But I don't want to make it seem but sometimes lines like that are important where they just say a cool ass line, like in Fistful of Dollars where he's going, "I don't think it's funny you laughing."
Yeah.
Those can be that's incredibly iconic line. And the way he looks the most crazy in that when he's doing that monologue. He goes, he gets the crazy idea, you're laughing at him. And it's like his eyes are like, oh, shit, this guy's crazy a little bit,
Yeah. Oh, we didn't mention the casket thing, too. He goes, when he 3 caskets. Sorry, I meant to say, I did 4.
He's ready to go up to the guys, the Baxters, and he goes, go get 3 coffins ready. And then he kills 4 guys. He goes, my mistake, 4.
Yeah. That's
and also the Clint Eastwood's entrance in this is fucking awesome. They know how cool he is. It's funny because it's only the second movie, but obviously, from our perspective, he's been iconic for like 60 years.
Yeah.
It's like they knew that in advance. Like 60 years from now, people are going to know. Because the way he comes up on screen is so cool.
The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, 1966. Plans for a third Leone Western started when screenwriter Luciano Vincenzoni phoned up United Artists and made a deal to make the movie for a budget of $1 million.
So it's pretty crazy how it happened. He talked about it was surprisingly easy, but I guess that's what happens after you make the highest grossing movie in Italian history. He just called them up and was like, yeah, we're going to do another Western. And they're like, okay, what's the budget? $1 million. And they go, what's the story? He goes, it's about these two guys. They try to find gold, and there's a bad guy trying to get it. And they go, all right, see you later. And they're like, it's greenlit. Congrats. Leone was pissed because he liked the mystique of the director. And he was like, I'm the most powerful guy, and I want to make all the decisions. So he was sort of upset at Vincenzoni for superseding him and going, not over his head, but kind of just taking things into his own hands. And then Vincenzoni later described that's sort of when his relationship with Sergio kind of started to sour a little bit. And but the story initially was called The Two Magnificent Tramps.
Jesus.
Can you imagine these titles are
yeah,
insane?
Yeah.
And but it's you know what's funny how The Good and the Bad and the Ugly, because you're like, oh, he named it The Good and the Bad and the Ugly. It's like, no, he named it the Italian version of that. It's crazy how the Italian version and the American version both just sound awesome. You know?
Do you know what is the Italian version?
Well, the Italian version is just Italian for The Good and the Bad and the Ugly, but I'm saying it sounds just as good in English.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like a translated title. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But the original titles for these, is he coming up with these original titles?
I don't know, dude.
Hope not, because it's like, wait, is this guy
Duck You Sucker wasn't his idea. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
It might have been. We'll get to that.
Yeah, it's just kind of crazy to go from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which is like the coolest title,
right,
to Duck You Sucker.
Yeah.
After reading the script, Clint Eastwood was unhappy with how the role of Tuco overshadowed his role as Blondie. Leone and his wife Carla traveled to America to convince Eastwood to do the movie.
So I may have falsely attributed this to For a Few Dollars More. I may have cut it out when I said it before, but I'll say it again here. So he gets there, and Clint Eastwood was like, I don't know if I want to do another Western. It's kind of been done. And also, he was upset with how Eli Wallach's character sort of had a bigger presence than him. He sort of felt like his role was contracting a little bit, especially given that Tuco was essentially the protagonist, which we'll get to, but also the backdrop of the Civil War sort of, kind of squeezed him to having a smaller role. And he was upset by that, allegedly. And Leone said, listen, pal, I turned you into the man with no name, and I can make anybody else into the man with no name. So if I don't want you to be the man with no name anymore, I can do whatever I want. And Clint Eastwood was like, well, shit. All right, fine, I'll be in the movie. Just let me do it one more time, please, please, please. No, he didn't say that. I like Clint Eastwood. He's a good man.
Which, I mean, if he did say that, I don't know how true that is. I don't know how much it would work.
I don't know if it was completely one or the other. But also their Clint Eastwood's success and Leone's success were both mutually assured. So they can't kind of talk shit about each other in that way, because without one, the other probably wouldn't have succeeded as well.
Yeah, I agree. Filming began in April 1966 and ended in July 1966, which gave Leone and the production team until December to finish the movie.
So I talked about how Eli Wallach had to be convinced, and Leone showed him the opening credits for A Few Dollars More, and he said, all right, I'm in. And he has some crazy production stories where, okay, so one of the first things he had to do is he had to have his hands tied behind his back. It was the scene where he gets shot off of the noose. And what they did is they had this miniature explosive inside of the rope, and whenever they would touch two wires together and it would explode. But the problem is the sound of the gunshot, the sound of the explosion would scare the horse. So Eli Wallach was like, Sergio, can we put some cotton in the horse's ears so he doesn't get spooked and like run off and I fall off the horse and maybe break my neck?
Yeah.
And Leone was like, he goes, cotton in the ears. And he goes, yeah, we do it in America. And they didn't. He just was making it up. And Leone was like, no, shut up. Don't even worry about it. And then they do the take and it's fine or whatever. But that was like a pretty big. And he was like, I'm sitting there in the sun for like 2 hours because they have to light it.
Yeah.
And then there was another story where when he's on the train with the officer who's handcuffed to him, and he jumps off the train and like beats the shit out of him and kills him, and then he has to figure out a way to break the cuffs, and he puts the officer's body on the train tracks and then puts his puts the chain over the track so that the train breaks it. He had to be very close to the train, and he goes, look, Sergio, like, are you sure? He's like, yeah, well, shut up, come on. And so that they do the take. And he goes, if I lifted up my head 4 inches, I would have been decapitated.
Yeah.
And I hear Sergio go, we got to do it again. They didn't get the focus right. So they do it again, and they dug a hole. He like dug a hole so his head can be a little bit lower down. And they do it again. The cameraman goes, "I couldn't see him. He was too far. He was too deep into the ground."
Oh my!
So Eli Wallach said, "You're using that first take," and they did. And they did.
Yeah.
And then there was another story where they had to, in order for the bags to rip open when he hits them with the shovel at the end in the cemetery, the gold, they needed to like pour acid on the bag on the leather, but the set guy, the visual effects guy, decided to store the acid in the same bottle that Eli Wallach was drinking lemon juice out of. So Eli Wallach drank acid and like immediately was like, "Ow, ow," and spit it out, but his lips got all burnt up and shit.
Dude, that's one thing I realized watching this movie, especially during the bridge scene. I'm realizing now, there's nobody watching for these people's safety on these sets.
Yeah, especially back.
They don't give a shit.
Well, that's why I always talked about. I think on maybe it was the James Cameron or maybe I forget which podcast we were doing. But why did movies cost so little relatively back then? Even if you use just for inflation, they still costed little. But also, it's like, okay, maybe we just have better regulations around not trying to get people killed. Because they show that I think they showed in Babylon in the 20s. If somebody died, if like 3 guys got ran over by a plane. A crash plane. Like nobody gave a shit. They're like, "Oh shit, we'll send $50 to the widow," and then it was fine. Nobody ever gave a shit.
That's what I wanted to. I was wondering. I never got around to it, but I was wondering: is there anybody who did an interview that was an extra during the scene where they're all rushing towards that bridge? Because there's no way somebody didn't like break their leg during that or something, just get ran over by a bunch of people, because there's literally just hundreds of dudes just running into each other, and it's just so hectic. I'm thinking, where are the safety regulations on these? Because the effects and everything just are so. All the explosions are real.
Yes. Well, first of all, I think this is one of the reasons why I think that the best stunts should have or best stunt choreography should have an award at the Oscars, more so than best original song or casting. Like obviously casting's
Who cares about song?
Well, 5 movies released qualify for best original song. They only do it so they can put on a show, which is fine, whatever. But best casting, sure, but make sure you have best stunts first. People die, all the time. Still they die. Anyway, you're talking about the bridge. So when they blew that up, do you know the story?
Yeah.
So when they blew that bridge up at the end, when the big Civil War sequence, the big battle between the Union and Confederates with the drunk officer, they originally, loaded up the charges, and the guy who's charged with blowing it up, the explosives guy, Leone told him, when I say vaio, which is go in like Italian or something like that, when I say go, you're gonna blow up the bridge. And he goes, "You got that?" And he goes, "Yes." And then somebody was like, "Hey, Sergio, you want me to go get this prop from down there before we blow up the thing?" He goes, "Oh yeah, so go, go, go." And then the guy goes, "Oh shit!" And because he heard go, and then just blew up the bridge. The cameras weren't rolling, and Leone was. They said that they saw the explosion, and then they turned back to the explosives guy, and he was just gone. He got in a car and just started driving away. He goes, "I'm fucked." And then I think whatever army, I think it was the Italian army, the Italian army, or whatever army that was supervising the thing. They were like, "Look, give us a few days. We'll build it again because we want to see this thing blow up on camera."
They felt bad.
Yeah. So that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's crazy. Apparently, Sergio Leone was just cursing at the guy so bad. Clint Eastwood said, "I could never really understand him, but I definitely couldn't understand him then because he was just screaming so much." Imagine just blowing up.
That's like your stomach.
Like
That's like losing the footage. I worked as my first production assistant job. I was working in Brooklyn, I think, or somewhere in New York, for the show called Almost Family for Fox. It was my first day on a film set. I was an extra on The Joker, and that movie won Oscars. Coincidence? No. But I worked from, let's say, noon to like 3 in the morning, and at the end of the night, they go, "Okay, here's the footage. Take it back." And I went, "Oh." And then this guy drove me. And I had a cool conversation. I think his name was like Steve something, and he drove me and I dropped off the footage. It was just crazy that I was also I sucked. I was a terrible PA. I sucked at everything. And then I left my bag in the guy's van, and I had to go get it a week later. Anyway, not relevant.
Yeah, not relevant.
But that's a terrible feeling, is like letting somebody down like that.
On December 23rd, 1965, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly was released in Italy and made slightly less than Fistful of Dollars and for few dollars more.
I'm surprised, like, reading about it, there was no apprehensions about the length, because it's 3 hours long. And I guess I guess he was riding off of the success of For a Few Dollars More and Fistful, so they were like, nice. But this basically started, you know how I said the same way those Peplum movies or the Swords and Sandals movies were a big like thing that happened in Italy, and then there was a depression in Italian cinema. This got the single-handed, like basically Leone single-handedly got Italy out of that depression. And then there was a big thing of the new wave was all these spaghetti westerns. And I think maybe I haven't seen any others. I haven't seen like Corbucci's movies or Barboni's or any other guys who are known for making spaghetti westerns. But I think Leone's have probably translated on a worldwide scale so much because they're so visually oriented, you know. And are we getting into the part where we talk about the overall thoughts?
Yeah.
All right. So I think, and also this secured distribution in the U.S. and the way it got distribution is because Fistful of Dollars, the distribution in the U.S. got so held up because of the Yojimbo scandal or litigation thing that these movies, by the time Fistful of Dollars premiered in the U.S., I think it was January 1967, Fistful of Dollars finally screened in the U.S. And by that time, The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, and that whole trilogy already came out in Italy. The Good, the Bad, the Ugly came out in 1966, right? So they basically made a deal with whatever distributor in the U.S. saying, hey, just release these. We have these 3 movies. Release them as the trilogy. So January, just release Fistful of Dollars. Then in the summer, release For a Few Dollars More. And then in December, January 1968, release The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. Or The Good, the Bad, the Ugly.
Do you want to get into your overall thoughts?
You go first.
All right. So this movie, for me, I told you that, you know how these movies throughout our lifetime, growing up in a meme culture, these movies have been memed to shit. Like, you don't even realize it. They're memes so far off that you don't. Some of the stuff that popped up in this movie, I didn't realize were from this movie. Like,
wah,
wah, like that.
Or even the music is in Chevy commercials now. And I saw a commercial for Modelo this morning. And they had, I'm like, shit.
Just everything. The super long, the three. I don't want to say three-way.
The climax.
Yeah.
That makes it sound better.
The three-way.
The standoff.
The standoff. I mean, these things. I didn't go into these movies thinking I needed to take it seriously, and then I watched them. I mean, before we got to this movie, I realized it was something I should have been taking more seriously. But this one, it's nice to see all the things that I have been seeing in meme culture growing up come to a realization in this movie. And be like, oh, wow, that's actually a serious thing. And you realize that it's super cool, which is why it lives on in memes today. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And or like it has such a big cultural significance still. And like what you just said, like you didn't really take it seriously at first. These movies weren't really taken seriously, I guess, in critical circles and in the more bourgeoisie circles, really, around around film, because like again, when they first came out, they're like, oh, they're trying to replicate like American westerns. What they weren't really considering how they were actually pushing the genre further and stuff. And with this, I think this is because, like I said, with Few Dollars More, it's a Fistful of Dollars, but just bigger, better in every way. But it's still like the same genre of movie, essentially. But in this, The Good, the Bad, the Ugly is the most attached from those 2 movies because, while you know, though that the jump from Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More was contained in the same genre, but to this, it wasn't so much of a crime, bounty hunter shootout action movie. This is more a historical epic. Even it's not historical. It's sort of like an apocryphal historical thing, which is like there's sort of some fiction to it, but it has that historical backdrop of the Civil War that I think is used. I don't know. It's used mechanically in the story. It's used very well. Philosophically, it's questionable in some moments, which I'll get to. But I do think I've never seen any David Lean's movies. I can't believe I'm saying that, but I've never seen a David Lean movie. Who's a very influential director who was known for these big, giant, sweeping movies like Lawrence of Arabia and Ryan's Daughter and Dr. Zhivago. And is it Ryan's Daughter? I think it's Ryan's Daughter. and this was basically him trying to do a David Lean movie, especially the Civil War battle scene at the end. The scale of this is insane.
Yeah.
And it's so well put together and so confident. Like, it doesn't seem messy around the edges at all, and it really seems like it's competently made. But I do think the visual flourishes that I talked about in For a Few Dollars More, I think Leone was moving a little bit further away from that, where a lot of the reveals are revealed through dialogue, let's say, which is fine because I still think it works very well. The whole way it wraps up with Eastwood saying Arch Stanton, and then there's nothing there, and then you're like, wait, what? So he just made up a name that happened to be there, and he goes, no, he said it was an unknown grave next to Arch Stanton. I'm like, that's so smart. That's such a smart idea. And let me ask you this: did you feel any? First of all, I think the movie's amazing. Okay, did you feel any apprehensions about how the Confederacy was shown in the movie?
No, honestly, not from. I don't know. I guess I hadn't really thought too much about the sides in that sense. I was paying more attention to the characters rather than. I just felt like. I don't feel like there was anything being said about either of those sides. I felt like they were using that as a engine to put the characters in a tough spot.
Okay,
almost,
Yeah,
I feel like that was a good way to establish the bridge scene.
Yeah. I think as a backdrop, it works excellently.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. But I think it's weird because I'm gonna try to say something without saying something stupid. Because I'm talking about, yes, it's going to be very difficult. Trust me. So I want to know why, because there's been no mainstream movies that depict the Nazis as good guys or a sort of like an empathetic or sympathetic perspective of the Nazis, or like Russian, or like Stalin or anything like that, or like the Russians in the 50s or whatever, or Japan during World War II. There's none of that. I mean, maybe for Japan there's a few of those, but. It's weird how the Confederacy has these movies like Outlaw Josie Wales and The General and all these other movies that have sort of Confederacy leanings, which is, but also it's weird because Buster Keaton, there's a movie called The Navigator that he did, and there's a black couple on the street that's like there's something funny that happens, and they're kind of like the couple that goes oh, and they see it, and that was in like 1926, let's say, and that was a big deal. Because that was a black couple in the movie in 1926, and people are like, you can't do that. What the hell are you doing? So obviously putting them in the movie is Buster Keaton saying, no, they should be in these movies. So for 1926, he's very progressive and not racist. But the movie, the General, he plays a Confederate soldier, and the Union soldiers are the villains in that. And I want to know why that is, because they wanted slavery, which is like one of the most evil things ever, right? And the reason I think that is, especially in movies, is because, to my knowledge, usually in history, when there's an underdog depicted, usually the underdog is perceived to be the protagonist or the sympathetic side because they're the underdog. And mechanically, usually those stories, people lean towards the underdog naturally, right? But it's weird because the Confederacy is like a rebellion, underdog rebellion that's fighting this quote unquote oppressive federal big government thing, but it just happens that like the freedom that they're fighting for just happens to be one of the craziest, most evil, tragic things that humanity has ever done. Mm-hmm. It's like the only time in history where people's freedom was leading to the oppression of people. It's weird. So I can't really put my finger on it. It's like a weird crux where usually, am I making sense at all?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But in Outlaw Josie Wales, the whole thing is that he's forming this team of ragtag American outcasts.
Yeah.
So that sort of works for that thing because it takes place outside the context of slavery. But in this, I was like, okay, so are they doing a sympathetic thing to the Confederacy? Because there's that scene where they're in the Confederate camp that's being run by the Union. So they're in the Confederate prison camp. The prisoners are the Confederates, and they're doing this thing where the villain, the bad, what's in Angel Eyes, is a sergeant for the Union. Mm-hmm. So now we're seeing the villain take place as sort of like a proxy for the Union, and he's torturing these prisoners.
Yeah.
And the Confederates are outside playing. and they're all crying. And it seems that the movie's leaning towards the Confederates. Like, can you believe what's happening? But then they also state in dialogue, which isn't as powerful or significant, but they still mention it, how the Confederate camp is worse. But then earlier they show Angel Eyes also giving whiskey to a Confederate officer, like siding him with them. And then they show Tuco and what's his name? Blondie. They take up they had the uniforms of the Confederates, and then they go, "Hey, down with General Grant, General." And that's a very good visual scene where they have all the dust on them. That's revealed to be Union soldiers. That's so good.
When he just goes.
Yep. Yeah.
And then you realize it's the Union. You're like, oh, that's hard
yeah.
as fuck. Holy
And
shit.
but now we have the protagonists, the good guys, on the Confederate side, and then Angel Eyes on the bad side, right? With the Union. And I'm not that the Union's bad. I'm saying the Union's on the side with the bad guy in the movie.
Yeah, sure.
And but then no, don't clip this and put it on Twitter. So, but then when later, then Tuco and Blondie become empathetic or sympathetic with the Union side. They start fighting with them, and they blow up the bridge, and we have that perspective. And then after that, Blondie gives the cigar and the jacket and puts the jacket over the dying Confederate soldier. So at first I was like, are they doing a Confederate thing? This movie's a Confederate thing? It's like, no, they're kind of just weaving their way through this conflict.
Yeah.
You know?
It's
a non-judgmental and non-argumentative, I think, perspective. It's more of just a,
I think if anything, it leans more towards trying to show like the human aspect of both sides.
Yeah.
Because even though what the bad, what's his name in this movie? Just
Angel Eyes.
Angel Eyes, yeah. Even though he is a Union soldier, he gets called out by other Union
that's a good point.
And
the officer with gangrene is like, no torture here, buddy. We're good.
Yeah. He basically is saying, I don't stand for what you do. I know what you do. I don't like it. And also, even the musicians who have to play, they show that. That's a good visual because he doesn't say anything. He just stops and he's. He
just can't. He plays the flute and he just can't. He can't keep playing.
He's done. He's like,
because they know that they're torturing them inside.
Yeah, they know what's going on, and you see it on the face of all the soldiers. They're kind of in the same way. None of them are happy to play that song or even sing it. They're just all a little somber, knowing what's going on. So, I don't think it's meant to pick a side. I think it's just, if anything, meant to show the human aspect of each of the soldiers.
Yeah. But the weird thing is, like, okay, so how much of this is an Italian not understanding American history? Because he goes, I don't know if this exactly works, because Leone talked about, he goes, I put the backdrop as the American Civil War to show the absurdity and the needlessness of war and violence. But it's like the Civil War, I feel like the Civil War and the World War II turned out pretty well. Like those are the only times in recent history where I can think like we went to war and something actually objectively good happened from it. You know?
Yeah. I don't know how much I want to like get into this because this is like a whole nother discussion.
Yeah, that was just
but that is true. You know, hypothetically or objectively speaking, it is a good fight to fight, I guess.
There's a funny
slavery, right?
Yeah, we're not going to talk about slavery anymore, we promise. But I'm going to mention a funny video that was done by like Vox or Vice, whatever. And there's this guy. When I stop talking, you're going to say, but wasn't it also about slaves? Okay, so that's going to be your line. So, but people say like the Civil War is about slaves, right? But it was about states' rights, actually. If you look into the history, it was about states' rights.
But wasn't it also about slaves?
I mean, I'm not a historian, okay? That's a real video of a guy who's like, no, the Confederate was sick.
Yeah.
Which is just a funny, I think the same breath, he goes, look, I'm not a historian. Like after claiming
I actually don't
history.
know that much about it.
Let me look. Also, I think Tuco, because you know how I said the backstory was attributed to Douglas Mortimer and For a Few Dollars More? And Tuco is that character. In this, he's essentially the protagonist of the story. We get to know his backstory with his brother and his dad and his parents dying or whatever like that. We get to know his motivations, and he actually goes, I don't know if he goes through a change, but he's the only guy who has any sort of narrative drive through the movie, really. We're kind of anchored on him.
But I like that you said I don't know how much changed, because I feel like he doesn't really have much of a character arc.
Yeah, I wouldn't say he has an arc.
I wouldn't say he has an arc in terms of like he's still just kind of a bad guy at the end, but
Yeah.
he does such a good job at being a stinky, smelly looking guy.
Yeah, and at some point I'm like, oh, so he's sort of like the good guy now for a little bit. I'm like, wait a minute, they said he raped.
Yeah, he's an asshole.
And I'm like,
He's
God, there's a
piece
lot of
shit.
rape in Leone's movies later.
Yeah.
We'll get to.
Mhm.
Also, one more thing about the final showdown, the stare down between all those guys. Obviously, that's probably the most. I don't know if it's the most impressive because it doesn't communicate like an idea. It basically accentuates a lot of tension, which is very impressive, and also the music. I can't stop thinking about the music when they're all when they're all like looking at each other or whatever. It's a fantastic. It's one of those things like it's been talked about to death. I can't say anything original of it, and it's sometimes when I watch classic scenes like that in movies, I start to go like that's it, and then it's usually like on the third watch. I'm always like, oh no, this is so goddamn good. I don't know why that is, but the thing that's most impressive about that to me is because if we're storyboarding, let's say an idea like the Douglas Mortimer, it turns out that he has a connection with that girl. We use the musical watch as a visual. I understand how you would storyboard that, where it's not Tuco. Indio has the music watch at the end, and for a few dollars more, and then you cut to Clint Eastwood, who has it, and then you cut to Mortimer, who looks on his pocket watch chain, and it's gone, so that's his. And it's like, okay, I understand how A and B and C makes D, right? But in this, I'm like, how do you storyboard just guys looking at each other? It's like, oh, now Tuco looks at Angel Eyes, and Angel Eyes looks at Blondie. It's like, I don't know how he gets a footing in that. I guess it's just in the editing.
Maybe he just puts the camera up and says, look there, like just keep doing it.
That's honestly probably what he does.
It's probably the best way to do it.
Yeah.
I would imagine. Just get a bunch of them looking at each one. And
that's true. And also, I don't know if he started to play music. I know he played music on Once Upon a Time in the West. I don't know if he played music for this movie. Actually, you told me something about when you were watching, I think The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, you said about the music. You felt like you felt a little bit of some Star Wars music in there. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, just the instrumentation and also this along with the scenery, it just felt like, I see things in these older movies, some of the older movies that we watched where I'm just thinking, oh, wait, George Lucas definitely saw this movie. And the scene where they're walking in the desert, the long scene where Tuco's making him basically do a death march.
Yeah.
The instrumentation of that and the shots, the shadows that he gets, it's straight Star Wars to me. I immediately got that vibe, and it's just cool to...
So this might sort of confirm your suspicion a little bit. This is from Christopher Frayling's book, Sergio Leone, Something to Do with Death. It says right here, George Lucas has told me now that he kept referring to music and the images of Once Upon a Time in the West when he cut Star Wars, which was really a Western, Series B set in space.
Yeah, I definitely see that. I've heard people say that about Star Wars, that it's just a Western in space, basically.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think our conversation about The Good and the Bad and the Ugly has exhausted its fuel?
I do believe so. Should we end it with a really long stare down?
Yeah, let's end it with that's a good one. Yes, we're gonna end it with a really long stare down, and if you're watching on YouTube, you can comment your thoughts on the Good and the Bad, the Ugly while we do it. Ready? No, I'm Clint Eastwood, dude. You're Tuco. You're a fat little nerd.
How do I do Tuco? I gotta get all sweaty and...
All right, this is going nowhere.
Once Upon a Time in the West, 1968. After The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Leone started his own production company, Refran, and made a deal with Paramount to make his first big studio movie. Did I say it right?
Refran. It's just the inflection with which you said it. So Refran it's the first two syllables of his two daughters, which was Raffaella and Francesca. Francesca.
Stupid. That's stupid.
What?
I'm not gonna lie.
What? Why?
I don't know. It's just
Good
cheesy.
Lord.
I'm sorry. Everything else he did, great. That's
except for
cheesy to
Ducky
me.
Sucker, which we'll get to.
Yeah.
So he said he wanted to make a more personal film, and this started the trend of him going, "This is my last Western. Good, the Bad, the Ugly was my last Western," and then he would make another Western. He said the same thing with Once Upon a Time in the West, made another one, Ducky Sucker. So, Ducky Sucker's like sort of a hybrid Western. We'll get to that. But then he when he was developing his next movie, he met with Bernardo Bertolucci, who was also a director. And I don't know when he started directing, but he was at least a writer at this time. And he had a conversation with him, and he talks about how he met Sergio Leone. And he goes, "Oh, I'm very happy to meet you, blah, blah, blah." And Leone goes, "Why?" And he goes, "Because I thought, The Good and the Bad, the Ugly was fantastic. I think your Westerns are amazing." And he goes, "Why?" And Bertolucci's like, "Is he just fishing for compliments? Like, well, this is weird. Why is he asking this?"
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes, "Because I love your movies." He goes, "Why?" And then he goes, "Because I like the way how in most movies in Westerns, you'd see the horses shot from profile or to the front, but I like how you shoot them from the ass." And Sergio Leone was like, "You write my next movie." So that's like that's just a funny story. How but also it's often things that seem banal or trivial like that, where it's like if you notice that, we might be on the same frequency.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we should write a movie together. So Bertolucci helped develop the screenplay to Once Upon a Time in the West. He doesn't have a screenplay credit; he has a story credit because it was him, Leone, and I think Vincenzoni or maybe Sergio Donati, who have the 3 story by credits because they kind of just took a couple months and started pitching ideas together and throwing some stuff in.
Mm-hmm. When casting the movie, Leone would finally get to work with stars he'd been trying to work with since A Fistful of Dollars: Jason Robards, Charles Bronson, and Henry Fonda.
So Henry Fonda was convinced, but he was again offered the role, and he was like, "All right, who's offering me these roles?" And he was starting to consider it, and he called Eli Wallach, and he goes, "Hey, should I do this movie with Sergio Leone?" And Eli Wallach was like, "You won't regret it. You're gonna have a great time. It's gonna be a great movie." And then Fonda subsequently talked with Leone and stuff like that. And Leone, the way he pitched it to him, because Henry Fonda was he played Abraham Lincoln. Mm-hmm. He mainly played very good, upstanding guys, like in My Darling Clementine. I think he played Wyatt Earp, I believe. And the only really villainous role he had in a Western was Fort Apache by John Ford, which is a movie I've seen, but I don't remember at all. I know that he plays Colonel Thursday, and he plays a general that kind of starts to lose it a little bit. And he's less of a villainous character and more of a tragic character, probably. Yeah. That's what I remember of it. And he was also the juror in 12 Angry Men. He was juror number 8. That's a great movie if you haven't seen that. And so he goes to Fonda and he goes, "Imagine this whole family's killed and then blah, blah, blah." And the kid comes out and sees what's been done to his family and he's crying. And then we see a gun come out and shoot the kid. And then we pan up from the gun up to the face of Henry Fonda. And the audience would be like, "What? No way!" And Fonda heard that. I was like, "All right, let's go." Mm-hmm. So he was like, "All right, I need to be like this dastardly fellow." So he went and got contact lenses put in to make his eyes brown, so you couldn't really see into his eyes. And he grew a mustache and everything. And he showed up to set, and Leone was like, "What the hell are you doing?"
I wanted you to look.
He was like, "I want those blue eyes. Like that's the whole thing." And he was like, "All right, it's fine, whatever." Mm-hmm. What else is on here that I can talk about? So Jason Robards was cast, and the thing about him is when they were coming to the meeting, either the first meeting or one of the meetings where Jason Robards was supposed to show up, he showed up drunk, or he couldn't show up because he was drunk, and Leone was like, "This is unacceptable. I'm not going to deal with this on the set. Like, no, please don't. He's not going to be like this on the set. He won't be drunk on the set." And then of course he showed up, but he never got drunk. He was strictly professional. He would just hammer. He would hammer drinks at night, but he would just wake up hungover in the morning. Yeah. But it wouldn't be like a nuisance to the set. There was one story while they were filming. All of a sudden, somebody told Jason Robards something, and he started breaking down and crying. And then that was the day that Bobby Kennedy got shot.
Oh, dang.
Which is just an anecdote from the set.
Mm-hmm. So that's why he was crying, though?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Dang, all these tragedies that happened during, like, the filming or whatever of the things that we're talking about.
With James Cameron and the 9/11 story.
Yeah. Wait, Jason Robards is harmonica?
No, Jason Robards is Cheyenne. Harmonica is Charles Bronson. Okay. Charles Bronson actually agreed to be in for a few dollars more, I believe, but he had a scheduling conflict.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I want to talk about this because this is something I'm interested about. Is this during the same time as Because I always see this, people are talking like in Once Upon a Time, and I think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, they allude to the fact that like, oh, I don't want to be the bad guy. It's not good for my career. Is this like something similar that maybe Henry Fonda hadn't done a bad thing because it would have been bad for his career? Or,
It's
you know what I'm talking
possible.
about?
Well, I think so you're saying Rick Dalton didn't want to play a villain in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
Yeah, like somebody says to him something about that, and I figured that was a
Yeah, he
truthful
might have
thing.
had some apprehensions about being a villain because I think he was actually a villain in a western that was like not really well known.
Mhm.
I think a few years before that, but it wasn't like as big of a deal. But I think maybe at the time that was maybe you're right. Maybe there was some apprehensions about him being a villain.
I wondered if you knew anything about that because it seemed like if Quentin Tarantino put it in a movie, I figured it would have something to do with like this, because I could see how maybe in the psychology of the audience, playing a bad character might not be good for your career overall, even if you're in a really good movie.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm not sure. I don't really know.
Like if the point is to get people to hate you, you know what I'm saying? So people might not have wanted to be in those kind of roles. Filming began in April in both Spain and Arizona, April of 1968. It was Leone's first studio movie and his first time working with big stars.
So this was sort of it was his first studio. I think he did it for Paramount, right? But I think it was sort of like the first hybrid U.S. spaghetti western because they filmed in Arizona and in Monument Valley. That was the first time one of Leone's movies filmed in the U.S. And Monument Valley is a very significant geography in the Western lore because John Ford, who was basically the director who pioneered the modern Western, filmed there. He's spent 10 movies filming there. Like from Stagecoach to The Searchers. And I think his last name was Cheyenne Autumn. The last movie he did in Monument Valley was Cheyenne Autumn, which I don't believe I've seen. But he would use that. That was a big. Do you know what Monument Valley is?
Yeah.
Okay. So that was a big deal for for Claudia Cardinale, the actress, to be in Monument Valley filming scenes is like almost like a crossover event in Western movie filmmaking.
And that's sort of where one of the things that we haven't really talked too much about is his ability to capture a landscape.
Yeah.
I mean, the way he gets Monument Valley by having her on the stagecoach just drive through ride through that with the score. No words being said. It's just
the
so
score
beautiful.
in this movie might be one of the best. It might be the best score in
For that scene specifically. When she gets off the train and goes to Sweetwater. Yep. It's just like,
and that's
like I could listen to that forever.
And that's another thing when she gets off the train. We'll get this isn't the overall thoughts, which is just a little tidbit of how it feels like a silent movie, or he's doing it visually. There's no scene of her going, "Well, sir, my family isn't here. I don't know what to do." You know what she's going to say. You know what's going on. She gets off the train and goes inside, and you see her talk to the guy through the window. Yeah. You know what they're saying. You don't have to hear that. And then the camera pans up, and the music swells, and it's amazing. Like that's such a strong shot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I first felt that, like I felt like the credits could start rolling. It's so grand. You know, obviously I knew the credits weren't about to start rolling.
It feels like it could be the end of the movie.
Yeah, it's like you could end the movie with a shot like this.
Well, Kubrick apparently was very impressed with how he timed that because what they would do is they had the music pre-recorded, and I think for that shot they had it timed so that shot would boom when so the music didn't have to change for the shot. The shot had to change for the music. And Kubrick called Leone and was like, "Hey, how did you do that? Like, what are you doing?" And Leone was like, "This is the way I play the music on set." And I think Kubrick may have adopted some of that for Barry Lyndon. I think he actually used some similar music from something for Barry Lyndon. I forget exactly.
And one thing we haven't really talked about is what was Leone like on set?
Like, you know when they go, well, he's an asshole, but he's a great director? Apparently, by some accounts, that was what he was like, which isn't hard to imagine if you know some of the stories, because he was obviously a guy who knew what he wants. He knew who he wanted, sometimes impatient. There's a story where they were filming Once Upon a Time in the West, and they were filming the opening scene when they have Woody Strode, I forget, Jack Alam, and the other guy, Al Moloch. Al Moloch is the guy who in the opening shot of Good and the Bad and the Ugly, where his face just gets in there, and you're like, whoa, what the hell? And so he was one of the guys in there, and they were filming. They had one day of shooting left on that scene. And Mickey Knox, who translated all the dialogue for Sergio Leone on this movie, was in a hotel, and they said they saw someone jump and like fall past their window. And it was the actor Al Malik from the third guy in the opening scene. He was still in wardrobe, and he committed suicide in his hotel. He just jumped off.
What?
And they say he landed and got to the bottom. And when they got down there, Mickey and his wife got down there, and Sergio Leone was there. And he said that when they were calling an ambulance and like taking him off, Leone was like, "Make sure you get the costume."
No, my God.
And
Dang.
and then while they were editing, he was like, "If only he could have died, he could have killed himself a day later. We would have gotten one more close up of him."
Shit.
So that was
Dang.
probably the most extreme of his behavior on the set.
Dang.
Because, but in terms of
sour taste in my mouth about this guy.
well, there's stuff like that that's bad. But in terms of how he treated people on set, like he would always be getting fights with the actors and stuff.
Yeah.
But in terms of, I can't imagine him doing anything that he would get canceled for today.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can't imagine that. But I'm not saying that there was, like, Claudia Cardinale was never like he was being really creepy or weird.
Yeah.
No, she was like, no, he was very understanding. Jennifer Connelly, when they were filming Once Upon a Time in America, said like she had to do a kiss scene with the other actor, and she never kissed anybody before. And she was like, and Sergio was just so sweet, and he was very calm and whatever. So in some accounts, he can be very good on set, and then I guess in some accounts he can be very, the opposite.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, I would imagine, honestly, one thing I just kind of thought about, he's Italian-speaking person. How does someone who only speaks Italian direct someone who only speaks English?
He would just act shit out. I mean, he has a translator there.
Yeah.
And then he sort of knew some English.
Uh-huh.
He'd be like, angry. Probably.
I figured he knew it a little bit, but I'm saying in terms of the nuance, like if he wants to change like a little bit about how they're saying something, do you think that might be why some of the scenes, there's just not
well, in terms of the way they say stuff, we didn't get to this. They dub everything.
Oh, I can tell that.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So they would probably do that in the recording booth.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So
on December 21st, Once Upon a Time in the West opened in Italy to mixed critical reception and slightly lower box office than all of his previous 3 movies.
So I think in France it did really well, which makes sense because the French like those weird long movies and stuff. And but in the U.S., the release was botched completely because they cut out like 20 minutes of it, and it just bombed in the U.S. It made 5. I don't know how much it made, but that would start a trend. Because his first 3 movies did really good in the U.S., and then Once Upon a Time in the West, Duck You Sucker, Once Upon a Time in America all bombed in the U.S., which sort of trend. I'll try to. That's the last time I'm going to say the U.S. So let's fucking restart that. That was terrible.
On December 21st, on December 21st, 1968, Once Upon a Time in the West opened in Italy to mixed critical reception and slightly lower box office than all of his previous 3 movies.
So, in Italy it did okay. In France, I think it did really good. It had a very long run there, but in the U.S. it bombed, which started a trend that occurred with Duck You Sucker and Once Upon a Time in America, these botched releases, because they cut 20 minutes out of the American version because they're like, American audiences aren't going to stand for this longishness.
Yeah.
And but I think this is in terms of his westerns. Like The Good and the Bad, the Ugly might be his most popular and culturally relevant, but I think in the context of the Western genre, I think this one might have more significance.
Yeah.
Because people always said like this is it was essentially the last Western. It ended the Western. And I was like, yeah, sure. I never really understood like how it did that. But then watching it this time, I really had a better grasp of how it was doing these things and how I understand how people were saying it ended the Western, because thematically it's depicting this encroaching civilization over the story, and that's visually communicated through the creeping railroad. Because there's a scene where Jill is riding in the buggy and they pass a railroad construction, and he goes, "They caught up to us again." basically saying they have to keep moving out west to get to the frontier because civilization keeps catching up, right? And that's a theme that corresponds with Harmonica's arc at the end of the movie, which I'll get to. But so it's basically you're watching the last Western story before the modern world takes place. There's so I don't know if you know this, I'm actually an award-winning screenwriter. And by award-winning, I haven't won any Oscars, but I won some screenplay competitions. And one of the spec scripts I wrote was a Western that basically deal with the same themes. And I watched this movie going, oh, it's already been done. So, and I can't just do it again. I can't do it, better. So the way those themes are communicated and how this is the last Western is because first in Frank's character, he's a bandit, brigand, gunslinger turned businessman or aspiring businessman because that's what he's doing all these railroad dealings with Morton because he wants to get involved in business because business is the new way of doing things, not gunslinging. And they show that. That's suggested by when Fonda or when Frank sits at Morton's desk, and he goes, "How does it feel, Frank, to sit at that desk?" And he goes, "Almost like holding a gun." And they talk about, well, it's more powerful than a gun or whatever.
Yeah.
Later, Morton is playing in a poker game with Frank's goons, and he starts dealing out the money like it's playing cards, saying like, money is the new way to do things in this new modern world. And then at the end of the movie, when Morton dies and Morton sends his own men against him and everything crumbles and their whole enterprise to become a businessman crumbles, he comes back to Harmonica and he ultimately fails as a businessman. And Harmonica goes, "You still a businessman, Frank?" And he goes, "No, just a man." And then Harmonica goes, "An ancient race."
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So now I'm getting chills just thinking about that line.
I thought he was
It's
just
a
going
sick-ass
hard
line.
by saying that, but I realized there's a lot more importance than just being badass
Right.
and saying that. Yeah.
So now this is signifying, and the movie has that like this melancholy feeling of like we're right on the cusp of this big change, like we're at the end, and the way Frank and Harmonica go and just have a shootout, we never see their gunshots even cause a hiccup in the construction of the railroad. And nobody cares, right? This new world does not care about any of the banal, things that are going. It almost dwarfs the conflict of the movie, how this new world is taking over, and it's much bigger and more important than anything that's going on right now between these two guys, almost. And so Harmonica and Frank and Cheyenne. Frank dies, Cheyenne dies, and Harmonica keeps going into the wilderness because they don't belong in this new world.
Yeah.
Their way of living is over, and Harmonica leaves, and you can literally see him go away from the train tracks and back into the wilderness, waiting for this to happen again. And the only character who does have a place in this new world is Jill, and I'm sure a 1968 version. I'm sure, like there's a modern feminist critique of the way she's treated in this movie. It's like sure, but I think for 1968 purposes, I think there is sort of a feminist message in it somewhere of saying she's basically the only one out of those four main characters that has a place in this new world where there hasn't been a lot of leads in Westerns with female protagonists because outside of prostitution, it's kind of hard to find a subject matter in a Western for a woman in that role. But I think her having this basically being the matriarch of this new town basically says that she has, a better role outside of because she was a prostitute, but she's going to have a more important role in this new modern society that's up and coming. And the last thing to this is in the book by Christopher Frayling, he talks about how what's his name? Harmonica is saying that the McBain had a dream of a lifetime, and he goes, and you don't sell the dream of a lifetime, you build it. And what happens is McBain tries to make that dream come true, but he gets killed, and his dream gets squandered by or squashed by this big capitalistic corporation, right? And it's ultimately trying to be taken away from him. But out of the goodness of Harmonica and Cheyenne's hearts, that doesn't happen, and that dream is able to be, put back into the hands of Jill. right? And the reason it's because it's called Once Upon a Time is because that's essentially a fairy tale of the West and what actually happened. Because in reality, those big corporations probably came in and took all those dreams away. But but in this story, this fairy tale, Jill gets to have that, which is why it's called Once Upon a Time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
I kind of rambled through that there, but I think we got there.
No, I think that was good.
Also, we didn't talk about that. So Eastwood, originally, Leone toyed with the idea of having Eli Wallach, Lee Van Cleef, and Clint Eastwood as the three men in the beginning, and then Harmonica comes and shoots them all down.
Beats them.
And he just beats them like that, like an inside joke. And apparently Wallach and Lee Van Cleef agreed to that, and Clint Eastwood was like, "No, I'm not going to do that."
Yeah, that. And
apparently Clint Eastwood was also offered the role of Harmonica at one point, and he was like, "No, I've done that already." And also Harmonica is the only one without like an actual name, I guess, because he's just Harmonica. We don't find out his actual name.
No, I like Harmonica being somebody different, but I don't know how do you feel about that character? Like, he's obviously good, but he does some questionable things in the film.
Well, that one thing where he starts like tearing off her clothes.
Yeah,
I was like, what the fuck's going on here? But what he was doing was kind of stripping her of the accessories, like the city living accessories on her clothes, like all the I don't know what you would call them, but the little white designs that go on the collar and the sleeves. He was ripping that all off and trying to make her fit into the West. Sort of. It's, I don't know. It was kind of weirdly done.
Weird West fantasies.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like you could just say like, "Hey, rip those off." Why do you have to be all...
Yeah. Why do you have to like? That's what I was kind of talking about. Like the questionable way he did that. To rip that part off, and I don't know.
I do think that the way the movie opens, though, obviously, like again, this is one of the. It's like the final sequence, the final showdown, and Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. There's nothing I could say about this that's unique and that hasn't already been said. But the way they just use. It's because it's 10 minutes long of just guys waiting around, and there's credits, and you have Woody Strode with the hat. That's like with the water coming down in the hat, and he drinks it. Woody Strode was in a lot of John Ford westerns, but he uses these little textures, and it gives you such a feel of the world. Like everything that it's happening, he's cracking his knuckles. Like that's such a tactile thing you can feel. The drinking the water, it's all hot and sweaty out. The thing with the fly, you can literally. My face was getting itchy when I was watching that and stuff. And then the way but also that was the thing we were talking about those good one-liners like Clint Eastwood saying like, "My mistake, 4 coffins, not 3." And this, it might be like the best one out of all of his movies when they go. He goes, "Is one of those horses for me?" And they go, "It looks like we're 1 short." And he goes, "No, you brought 2 too many." And they're all like, "Oh shit!" And then,
I like that scene too, where they could easily just set it up, or Sergio Leone could just set it up easy to have him easily beat those 3 guys, but he actually takes.
He gets shot. Yeah.
So you realize he might not be as smooth as, Blondie.
Right.
But he's still a badass. He's still got it, but he might be like further towards the end of his line.
Yeah.
He's not as quick as he probably once was.
And even
so you get a sense of that.
And we're talking about the way like he can communicate a whole thing with just people's faces and like some other close-ups. That shot of Henry Fonda walking, he's all out of focus, and the way they harken back to that throughout it's so smart. And I think it's taken from another movie somewhere, but. That sequence, it's not like he goes. I think he says, "Who are you?" But he doesn't go, "Remember me? You killed my brother, you son of a bitch." He does. He just puts the harmonica in his mouth, and then to show that Henry Fonda that Frank knows who this is now. They cut back. That's such a smart reveal. You don't need to know any more details about that. Also, really quick before we get to Duck You Sucker, I just wanted to add that an interesting perspective that I read in that book. Where how they were talking about, some guy said it was the first postmodern Western or postmodern movie, I guess, for 1968, because it contains all these individual references to past Westerns, and then it adds a little twist to show this new theme of like things are changing and stuff like that. I can't, bang off a list of references in my head right now, but those are in there if you're looking for them. It's basically a collage of all these. That's what gives it a greater significance to the Western genre too. It gives it a more holistic perspective that it has all these Westerns, these references to the Westerns inside of the movie. But it also is important because I saw a quote somewhere where I was like, this guy was like, back in like this era, movies were about life, and now movies are just about other movies. And I think that somewhat is true. And I think that's why they say the postmodern Western, because it's basically saying it's because looking back on these movies in sort of in a meta way, kind of commentating on them and stuff by having these references to them in there. So like, if you look, like Paul Thomas Anderson has references to other movies in his movies. For example, the motorcycle scene in The Master is very reminiscent of the motorcycle scene in this great Jonathan Demme movie called Melvin and Howard. That was definitely an inspiration for that scene. There's like the shots of the motorcycles riding are the same. So that was just an interesting tidbit that I wanted to throw in there, even if it wasn't the most refined, explanation.
You could also say with a lot of Quentin Tarantino movies, he basically references a lot of Sergio Leone's
Yes,
movies.
exactly. Yes, that's a good, perfect example.
A lot of shots from him.
If there's any references to other westerns in Once Upon a Time in the West that you've noticed, let us know in the comments.
Duck, You Sucker, 1971. Disappointed with Once Upon a Time in the West released in the United States, Leone left Paramount and made a deal with United Artists to produce his next movie.
So the 1970s, which we'll get to after this, is sort of Leone's producing era, where he was like, wait a minute, if I produce a movie, if the movie's good, I can get all the credit, and if it's bad, I can just blame the director. So what he did was he wanted somebody to direct it, so we got Peter Bogdanovich, who just did Targets, who was a very kind of like a smash hit at the time, not like a giant thing, but it was his first movie that got him attention in Hollywood, and so he hired Peter Bogdanovich to help develop the story, and they said they brought him in, and during their first meetings when they were just spitballing and throwing stuff together, Peter Bogdanovich the whole time was just going, I don't like that idea, I don't like it, no. And then Leone was like, all right, Fancy Pants, why don't you try to come up with something? And he goes, I need my mom here.
He had no idea.
He goes, I need my mom. She's my muse. So they flew his mom out.
Wait, actually?
Yeah. So they flew his mom out, and then they were, then he started like spitballing, and they go, you got 3 weeks to give us something. So he spent a few weeks writing up a treatment for the movie, and they said it was just like the shittiest. Yeah. Leone read it, because he got it translated into Italian, and he read it and going, this translation has to be off.
Yeah.
So we got another guy, and it was the same to translate it, and it was the same thing. So then subsequently, Peter Bogdanovich was let go from the project.
Eli Wallach and Jason Robards were initially attached to play the two leads, but ultimately Rod Steiger and James Coburn were cast in the lead roles.
So James Coburn, originally he was wanted for Fistful of Dollars. Are you looking at my silly hat?
Yeah.
So he was originally thought. Do I have hat hair now?
No.
God damn it. All right.
Fuck, no, keep going.
All right. So James Coburn was like, I don't know about this. So he called Henry Fonda, and he goes, hey, should I work with Leone? And Henry Fonda, according to James Coburn, said that Sergio Leone was the best director that he ever worked with. Which is crazy to say, because Henry Fonda's worked with Sidney Lumet, John Ford, all these guys. So to him to say that Sergio Leone's the best one he ever best one he's ever worked with after one movie is kind of insane to me.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's exactly believable.
Ultimately, Leone fired Bogdanovich from directing the project and hired his assistant Giancarlo Santi. However, after 10 days of shooting, Steiger and Coburn demanded that Leone direct the movie, which he did.
So Steiger and Leone didn't get along, at least for a big portion of it. And there was one story where it got to the point where, because Steiger was always the one, like, because he just won an Oscar for a movie that I forget. But it was this. I think this was his first role right after getting the Oscar too. So he was coming over, and Leone didn't really like union stuff. He was just like, no, we finished shooting when we finished shooting. And Rod Steiger would come over and be like, hey, are we done shooting? Like, everybody's done shooting. Let's go back to the thing. And Sergio Leone was like, I'm the director, goddammit. You don't do this shit on my set, blah, blah, blah. There was one time where they wanted to leave because they were filming in the heat for so long. And Steiger went, Leone, you see that Mercedes? I'm going to get in there and go back to my hotel, and I'm not going to, do this anymore. And there was just big fights between them all the time.
On October 29th, 1971, Duck You Sucker was released in Italy under the title Once Upon a Time, The Revolution. It had solid box office runs and the best critical reception of Leone's career in Italy and France. However, it bombed in the U.S., and shortly after the title was changed to A Fistful of Dynamite.
So originally, the title for the movie was "Keep Your Head Down," which is sort of similar to "Duck You Sucker," because I guess we'll get into it now. Because one of the whole themes about the thing is it's sort of an anti-revolution movie, where it's basically saying if there's a revolution, it's the same thing is going to happen. The poor people are going to get fucked over, and the people who fight the revolution are going to be screwed, and the people who started the revolution are still going to be fine.
Yeah.
Just don't get in. Just keep your head down. Don't worry about it. Duck, you sucker. Because it's basically the whole thing about the bombs is like you're ducking out of the way of this big bomb that's going to go off. Don't fall for it. But Leone said that this was, and I kind of like how his next trilogy of movies was the Once Upon a Time trilogy. I don't know why they didn't call it Once Upon a Time in the Revolution in America. I don't know why they thought Duck You Sucker was a better title. Maybe because it felt had the same kind of idea as Keep Your Head Down.
Yeah.
And in that context, I think it does work as a title. But Duck You Sucker just sounds like the shitty, straight to VHS Western.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
It's But Leone later said, maybe the statement didn't age entirely well. He said because he wasn't supposed to direct it, so he didn't feel like he got the proper creative journey through the movie. And he said, working on this movie felt like I was being stuck with a disabled child.
Dang. Oh my God.
Which is a crazy thing to say in retrospect.
Yeah.
I think this is the weakest of the movies we're
agree.
talking about. Maybe except for Colossus of Rhodes. But the first time I watched this, I watched the first hour. I'm like, holy shit, this is the best Western I've ever seen. Because it just had this weird, out-of-tune, kind of funky vibe to it where James Coburn and Roger Steiger are looking at each other like, you son of a bitch. They're throwing bombs at each other and shooting each other's and stuff. And I really liked it. And then the second hour and a half just dragged so much. And this time I'm like, all right, let me see what's going on here. Same exact thing happened. Actually, that's not true. I like that stuff between James Coburn and Roger Steiger in the first half, but actually the opening, in terms of because the reason I think one of the reasons this movie doesn't work is because we talked about that boyishness, juvenile quality that his first four movies have, and I think he sort of abandons it a little bit. I think the parts of it that have it I like are the bombs going off and the rivalry between Juan and John, and I think that's represents the childish juvenile stuff that's fun. But I think there was a I think a lot of times there was a lot of political movies that were coming out in Italy at the time, and I think Leone kind of got swept up in it. He said he didn't really like political films, and then he sort of made a political one. Because if you look at all of his movies, they usually open on a landscape or something in the West or whatever. But in this, it opens on a quote from Chairman Mao, which is sort of like opening a movie with a quote from Hitler or Stalin, and you're like, what is this saying about it right here? Like, I don't know, because now it doesn't put the movie in a context of entertainment or emotion. It puts it on like a political context, which is weird, And I think maybe at too fast of a rate, he abandoned that juvenile energy for a serious political movie. And I don't think the political commentary in this movie is as subtle as it should have been. I think it's a little heavy-handed, like when he gets into that opening carriage with and they're all like, look at this dumb pig, and he's a shitty poor person. Look at me. Yeah.
It's super heavy-handed.
Yeah.
A lot of the points they're trying
because
are super heavy-handed with, even, this goes back to some of his other movies where instead of saying it, he would just show it.
Yes.
But this movie, Juan literally just says exactly what you said about Revolution before.
Yes.
He's just like, the poor get killed and the rich are, he literally says that.
Yeah. Which is actually an incredibly interesting idea. But when it's said like that, it's like, okay. It's like in Aquaman. I think I talked about this in the James Cameron episode, which you can watch on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So watch that whole thing and then watch this again. So, but in that one, in Aquaman 2, they make what's his name? Randall Park's character goes, yeah, but Black Manta, if you start using this stuff, it's gonna go into the atmosphere and it's gonna increase, and the climate's gonna change. And then he essentially looks at the camera and goes, and climate change is bad. It's like, oh, that's what you spent $200 million to tell us that climate change is bad. You said that. You said it. I didn't know that. Thank God somebody spent $200 million to tell me that. It's sort of the same thing where it's like, okay, if you just said it in dialogue, you didn't really need to go put it in a movie. Just go lecture at some university somewhere. I don't want to be too, I don't want to be too flippant about that because I'm sure there's other stuff in movies. I'm sure somebody can pull up an example of something that I like in a movie that kind of breaks this rule we're talking about.
Yeah,
but still. But I think in him saying that, but they do what he says to James Coburn in that scene is James Coburn is reading this very intellectual political book about patriotism or whatever, and then after Juan says that to him, he throws it in the mud, which is a good visual. But also the narrative of the movie does have that visual where Juan gets swept up and also the same way that Charlie Chaplin. It's almost like a macrocosm instead of a microcosm of the way Charlie Chaplin gets swept up into the socialist protest in modern times, where somebody drops a big red flag in the street and he goes, "Hey, your flag!" And then all of a sudden there's a big march behind him and he gets arrested. It's almost like the same thing with Juan, where he just wants to rob a bank, but James Coburn, John Mallory, is sort of tricking him and trying to make it, and then the sequence where he goes in to rob the bank and he ends up becoming this revolutionary hero is similar to that Charlie Chaplin scene. And I think, and the whole thing about the poor people ended up getting, are the ones that end up getting fucked over, is true in this movie because Juan's entire family gets killed. And then at the end, all he has is John, and then John gets killed. And after John gets killed, the movie ends with him going, well, what about me? Because now the revolution's over, and his life is destroyed, and he has nothing to live for. So that successfully communicates that idea that Juan is expressing. It's just, I think maybe Sergio Leone fancies it. A lot of people around this time said he kind of fancied himself a little as a intellectual and maybe got a little too full of himself around this time, which I would semi agree with. But what did you think about this movie on a whole? And why did you not like it as much as the others?
Well, sort of for what we were just talking about, but it also felt just didn't feel like it flowed really well for me at certain points. I mean, some of the cuts had me wondering how did they end up here anyway, or when, like how long was that cut? I mean, one of the things that really didn't work for me is when they're hiding. It's like right after they basically break everybody out of jail, and then it cuts and they're just somewhere else and they're together again. It doesn't really work for me because they were just walking away from each other and he's getting carried away by the crowd, and then they're back into a smaller place together talking, like just sort of angry at each other. It seems for me that stuff just didn't flow well.
It seemed like there were some puzzle pieces missing, maybe.
Yeah. Maybe there could have been a scene in between that, but I also just don't know how to feel about the main guy.
Juan?
Yeah,
that's another, because I'm not gonna say I like it, but I do think it's interesting where, in Once Upon a Time in America and Once Upon a Time the Revolution or Duck-You-Sucker, the protagonist rapes a woman, and he's the protagonist, right? So I think on one hand, it's interesting from a filmmaking perspective. It's like, oh, how is Leone going to keep us interested in this character? And that kind of working on that line you might push the boundaries of how to do certain things with character or whatever. It just opens up the story to be a little bit more interesting with how, but also he's raping a lady. And you're like, well, was that needed? Also, how do I feel about this? I don't know if it's, but I do think there's inconsistencies in Juan's character, though. I think like Kubrick would be somebody who'd be really good at doing that, which he did in A Clockwork Orange, where he rapes a lady and murders people. But you're not on his side, but he's using. I'm not going to talk about. I can't get into Clockwork Orange, but he's using that stuff to actually enhance his argument for the theme of Clockwork Orange. If you want to know what that theme is, you can go watch the Stanley Kubrick episode and skip to the Clockwork Orange in the chapter description. And but in this, I don't know what him raping a lady has to do with giving a stronger punch to the theme he's trying to communicate. Like maybe, but like that's like the heavy-handed political stuff where it's like, oh, so it's good that like a poor guy raped a rich lady. or
No,
like stripped
yeah.
them naked and threw them in the like sure, it's a funny visual to throw them with the pigs, but it's like, what is this doing? And but the visual that I do like, because it's so uncomfortable, is when they're talking shit and like saying slurs to him when he's in the car.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the close up on their mouths eating. And in the book, Christopher Frayling said it almost looks like their mouths are puckered assholes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's actually a really good way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
But another inconsistency, I'm sorry if I'm rambling, but another inconsistency with Juan's character, he goes, "This is my family, I love them." And one of the things in the movie is that his family gets killed, and he's like, "Shit, I've lost everything." But one of the things that kind of softens that blow from the audience's perspective, and it doesn't feel completely right, is when they go and rob the bank in was it Mesa Verde, or is it El Paso?
Mesa Verde.
Mesa Verde. El Paso is for a few dollars more. Is they go into the bank and they rob it, and two of his sons get shot, and he just doesn't give a fuck. He doesn't even like. There's not even a close up on him, and I'm like, is that his son? Like, why doesn't he care? I'm like, does he not care about these kids? And then later he does. I'm like, that feels weird. Maybe they weren't his. I don't know. It was weird.
Well, even still, I mean, that's, he loses his kids, and he doesn't necessarily know, because when they're in the cave, he doesn't see them, but John does.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, he sort of pieces it together that they're probably dead, and he reacts, but it's not a father losing all of his children reaction.
Yeah. Wait, what scene are you talking about? When he realizes.
I feel like they're talking later on. I can't exactly remember. I think they might be in the train car.
Mm-hmm. With like all the birds and stuff.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly. But there is a scene later on where he does piece it together, and it's not like I don't know. It's
What do you mean pieces together? Like he didn't know his kids
mind,
were. Oh, like like it clicks.
Yeah, it kind of clicks in his mind.
That he's lost everything.
Yeah, but it's not. I don't know. There's just still so many things about the character where it's like, does this guy actually even care? Or,
yeah.
And
while I do like Rod Steiger's performance, I do think that James Coburn's John Mallory is much more interesting.
Yeah.
And I think the things that work about the movie as well as they work. Can you see how much time we have left? I think the things in the movie that work as well as they did in his previous movies are the things with his character. For example, the way he uses the flashbacks, and also the music, shun shun, shun shun. That's excellent music. But the way he cuts to those slow motion flashbacks of John with his friend and that girl, and I think the most powerful one is that thing when I'm talking about, like, it communicates this ideas with close ups, and it explains a whole character with these sparse, very economic use of these shots, these close ups. Is the shot when they're in the bar, and his friend is giving up all the other IRA members to the police, and he points at John Mallory, and John turns around, and then they're looking at each other in the mirror.
Yeah,
that's such a strong visual. And then he turns around and shoots them, and then everybody gets killed in that firing line. Fantastic. And then we see that, and then later, when what's his name, Villega, the doctor who gives everybody up. And John sees that.
Yeah.
He's talking to him, and then we cut back again to John killing his friend with the shotgun, and Villega's like, "Don't judge me," and he's like, "I'm not gonna judge you. I did that once before."
Mm-hmm.
And it's like we know the whole character. I thought that stuff is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, that whole part of the story works for me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what do you think about the ending? Do you think that the ending where it's revealed that they're kind of in like a threesome relationship, or I don't know?
Oh yeah, they're kind of just these young.
Yeah, they're all just like making out.
They're sharing the same sweetheart almost.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was interesting. I didn't think it was like a big like revelation. I was just like, yeah, that makes sense. Whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard. I feel like that can have multiple meanings. I don't necessarily have multiple meanings in my own head, but it just.
Well, I thought that maybe the friend was jealous that he had the girl. But then I saw the thing that, like, oh, well, he kissed her too, so I don't know. I thought it would have maybe added more depth to that relationship if he was like the third wheel and he was like, I'm going to put John in prison so I can get with the lady or something, you know what I mean? Maybe that's reading too much into it, but that's an interesting observation you made.
Yeah. They're all together the whole time in all those memories, other than obviously when he shoots them, they're all pretty happy. And for me, the kissing at the end was going on like way long, kissing it and his face.
It's a long shot.
In my notes, I wrote down that John's face when he's kissing the girl is like, it looks like he never kissed the girl before. He literally goes.
Yeah, James Coburn has kind of a hard face.
Yeah, it
but
works.
It's a sick face. I like the shot when he pulls his mask down for the first time.
Yeah. That's a cool. Yeah,
the way the music worked was so. In that scene, I just love it was that weird funkiness, and also this isn't really a Western.
Mm-hmm.
I think because this trilogy, the Once Upon a Time trilogy, is sort of. It's kind of takes place in 3 different periods in America, and this is kind of an anachronistic interpretation because it's 1913, but I think the Mexican Revolution didn't happen until the 20s, and I think the IRA didn't happen until like the 30s or 20s.
So it's all over the place.
So it's kind of just scrambled up in order to make. It's an interesting intersection of subject matters, but it's really more of a war movie. There's not like the only westerny stuff in it is sort of in the beginning. And that's pretty much it.
Even still, I had like trouble figuring out. This might be my own fault, but the army. Who do they represent? Because the leader kind of portrays. He seems like a German.
Yeah,
guy.
I think that's intentional. I think people say it's sort of supposed to be a metaphorical thing about World War II or whatever. But also that's weird because if the whole premise is like don't have a revolution, you're screwed. It's like why are you picking World War II for that one?
Yeah,
you know, it's strange. I don't know. Again, I think it might be. It's first of all, it's the Leone movie that I've seen the least. I've only seen it twice, so maybe I don't have a full knowledge of the geography of ideas that I need to in order to understand it more complicatedly. But is complicatedly a word?
Yes, in the context of this conversation now.
All right, excellent. So yeah, I don't know, but I do. You know, there is stuff to. How do you? Let's do it on a scale of 1 to 10.
1 to 10 of how much I understand it?
No, of how much you like it.
How much I like it? Honestly,
6 being okay, 7 being good, 8 being great, 9 being amazing.
I'd say probably a 6. Honestly.
Okay.
Just for me, you know.
Yeah, I'd say like mid to high 7s maybe.
Okay.
Because I do think the last hour and a half is kind of a chore to get through.
Yeah.
But I do think there is some really great, valuable stuff that you can actually learn from. You know, not in terms of from a filmmaking perspective, not in a philosophical perspective. So this is probably ranks like more than the lowest.
For me, it's definitely the lowest in the Sergio Leone movies. Still worth a watch, though.
Definitely,
I would say still watch it because John is still a really good character.
It's not if it's boring. It's not a movie where you're gonna be. I do think it is thought provoking. Like you don't watch this movie going, I've thought about this already. I think it does operate on some kind of interesting ideas.
Yeah, definitely.
So, what do you guys think of Duck You Sucker? And which title do you prefer? Duck You Sucker, A Fistful of Dynamite, or Once Upon a Time, The Revolution? I think I prefer Once Upon a Time, The Revolution.
I agree with that.
Stop trying to dick ride me, dude.
Leone's producing years. Since his last 2 movies had bombed in the U.S., Leone couldn't get Once Upon a Time in America off the ground, so he turned to producing as his primary focus. This era of his career included movies like My Name is Nobody, A Genius, 2 Partners and a Dupe, The Cat, and Un Sacco Bello.
So, like I said before, he thought producing would be a good way to get some movies out while taking the credit if they were good and, blaming it on the director if they were bad. And My Name is Nobody was a sort of his answer to Trinity. They Call Me Trinity, because that was a straight-up comedy where he would I think it was in Trinity, where he goes, the guy played by Terrence Hill, who became a big star in Italy at the time, he goes, I can draw and redraw and undraw 3 times by the time you get your gun out. And he goes, and draw. And he goes, so that's a comedy, and there's really funny. I believe it's from the Trinity movies. And then Trinity is Still My Name. The sequel became the highest-grossing Italian movie, and that's when people saying like, okay, now the Western's really dead, because once you start laughing at the Western, it's kind of hard to recover.
Yeah,
that's sort of you can sort of make a comparison to Marvel. because at some point Marvel movies kind of became a parody of themselves, where they were afraid to have an earnest, serious moment.
Yeah.
Like in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, I believe there's a scene where they come together and you get the money shot of them all standing together, and it's like a really good moment. And then Mantis gets hit by a rock and falls over, and it's like, idiot.
Yeah,
It's like, dude, come on, just have an earnest moment for goddamn once. Thor Ragnarok does the same thing, where it would have been sick if Bruce Banner jumped out of the helicopter at the end onto the Bifrost Bridge, and came down and went raw, and then all the Asgardians go like that, and they start fighting. That would have been sick, but instead Bruce Banner just falls, and then he, it's stuff like that. And of course, Marvel movies now are not making a lot of money, but that's partly due to those movies being released on Disney Plus. A lot of the time, like 50% of Marvel content's on Disney Plus, so obviously people aren't going to associate Marvel with the movie theater as much as they did pre-Endgame. Anyway, this isn't a Marvel podcast. Maybe we'll do an episode on Marvel or do an episode on the DCU one day. What were we talking about?
Sergio Leone's producing career.
Oh yeah, so My Name Was Nobody. He got Terrence Hill to sort of do a Trinity character, but it was sort of a more serious version. Like it was still a comedy, but it was kind of had a little bit more weight to its dramaticism. And Henry Fonda returned as this gunslinger guy who was sort of over the hill. I forget exactly. I haven't seen the movie, but that was sort of a moderate success, I believe. And then what was the dupe? What was the second movie on there?
The Dupe or hold on. Genius, Two Partners, and a Dupe.
Yes. So that movie is interesting because they filmed that, and also he produced these, but there's sequences where he just blatantly directed them. And he's like sort of uncredited as a second unit director on these. That movie, The Genius, The Dupe, and the whatever, that they finished that, and then somebody stole the negative.
Oh my!
And then held it for ransom. And they were like, "Well, we're not going to do that." So they had to rebuild the movie from alternate takes.
Oh man!
And then word got out of that. That the movie was all alternate takes, and then the box office suffered, and they're like, well, what's the point? And then it kind of, the release of that got buried. The Cat, I think, was an Italian gangster crime movie, sort of like a crime thriller. That's, that wasn't very notable. But then the Un Sacco Bello was who was the comedian? I forget the comedian's name, but he was an Italian comedian again that was in this movie that was essentially... he played 4 characters in 4 different chapters of this thing that was like, and apparently it was pretty successful. So there was some hits and misses in there, but not really. He didn't really direct any movies or produce any movies that are talked about a lot. The only one is My Name Is Nobody.
Once Upon a Time in America, 1984. In 1967, Leone was first exposed to the book The Hoods, written by Harry Gray. Producer Fulvio Morcella read the entire book aloud in Italian to Sergio, who instantly thought of adapting it into a movie.
So yeah, that was that's sort of the opposite of Sergio acting out the movie for everybody. He was just getting a guy. I don't know if they had an English print of it, so he was probably just like, well, I can't read this, so somebody spend 30 hours reading this aloud to me.
Oh my God.
Which is crazy. So I don't know if it'd be 30 hours, but that's how long it would take me to read the book.
Yeah.
But so Harry Gray, his real name was Harry Goldberg. He was sort of a Henry Hill type character from Goodfellas, where he sort of got out but had to go anonymous a little bit because of his connections with the gangster. It's sort of the novel The Hoods is sort of like an autobiographical tale, and so. Leone originally was like, I want to talk to this guy. So he calls up the agency or whatever, or the publishing, whatever. He makes the proper call so that he gets to the agent and goes, hey, I want to talk to, or the lawyer goes, hey, I want to talk to this guy, Harry Gray. And they go, ridiculous, can't happen, sorry, boom. And then a few days later, he gets a call, and it's Harry Gray on the phone. And then they set up a meeting, and they go, him and I think it was Sergio Donati. I believe so. I'm not sure. They go and they have a meeting with him in this cafe somewhere, and they start talking to him, and he just won't. He just keeps giving like 1-syllable answers, or yes, or 1-word answers. They would go yes, no, maybe. He would never divulge anything. So they would just be asking. It was like pulling teeth, they were saying. Like, we couldn't get this guy, we couldn't get the conversation started. Like it's like an hour of us trying to get information out of him. You'd think we were like planning a crime.
Yeah.
People probably called the cops on us because it was so sketchy. And then eventually he just left. He just went goodbye and left. And they're like, what the hell? But subsequently they had more meetings over the years, and he actually went to Harry's home, and his wife was just so tired because he went to jail and his wife had to wait for him. So she's kind of like a very jaded lady, but they had more meetings, and then 3 weeks before production, because the whole deal, because then they found out that Harry Gray was like, oh yeah, I sold the rights to this guy. And he's like, oh, shit, we've been developing the story. So this other guy, I think Joseph Levine, was a producer that sold the rights to Dan Curtis. And Dan Curtis, he was planning on directing the movie himself. So Alberto Grimaldi, I believe, or Charles Bloodhorn, and Sergio Leone had to go to Dan Curtis and go, hey, if you give us the rights, we'll let you direct this movie and we'll produce it for $2 million. And they went sick, and they made the trade. But then the deal was they could only make the movie if Harry Gray was a consultant on the movie. So Sergio Leone called him up weeks before the production started and said, hey, you're going to be the consultant on the movie so we can, because you're contractually obliged. And his wife answered the phone, and she's like, oh yeah, he died a few weeks ago before the movie got made. So Harry Gray died.
Feeling that the script should be written by an American, Leone hired Norman Mailer to write the script. But Leone was ultimately disappointed and called the draft a Mickey Mouse version of the story.
It's hard not to imagine him saying a Mickey Mouse version of the story without Tommy Wiseau going, this is a Mickey Mouse version.
Mickey Mouse stuff.
So Norman Mailer was hired, and he was like, I guess, the epitome of a writer from the 1950s, where his thing of writing wasn't getting up in the morning, having a nice glass of water, and then you taking a walk, and then 3 hours of writing, and then you just chill. Maybe this. His writing was this violent thing where, no, I'm going to lock myself in a hotel room for 3 weeks. I'm going to get 4 bottles of whiskey, and I'm going to get a giant box of Havana cigars, and I'm going to bang this thing out. And he didn't come out of the room for 3 weeks. And then the draft he turned in with Sergio was like, this sucks balls, dude. You suck. He met with Harry Gray. And he apparently he met with Harry Gray, and he wasn't expecting Harry Gray to not say anything. Yeah. And during the meeting, Norman Mailer just talked the whole time, and Harry Gray didn't even say yes or no, maybe. He just didn't say anything. Really? And Mailer was just talking and talking, and without even saying goodbye, Harry Gray just got up and left. It was like, fuck I love this guy. Harry Gray guy. Harry Gray sounded like he was funny. So yeah, that was the ballad of Norman Mailer.
I just want to be in the room one time when something like that happens.
Yes, I feel like nothing like that happens
where a
anymore.
guy like Harry Gray just gets up and walks out of the room.
Next time we have a meeting with somebody, I'll do that.
Yeah, okay, and then I can tell the story about Johnny just walked out. He was pissed.
Can you tell him that he has high cholesterol at the doctor's office?
You leave the doctor's office. The doctor's about to tell you.
Can you tell him that he has syphilis?
Robert De Niro did 2 months of research before officially signing on to do the movie.
So by all accounts, Robert De Niro is a very professional guy who likes to do a lot of research into his projects. And as stated, he did so many. It was before he was even signed on. He was doing the research, and eventually he did, because after feel like he has a full context of what he's getting himself into, he was given the choice to play either Max or Noodles, and he picked Noodles. And also his salary was $3 million, and I think it was the first time an actor's salary exceeded $3 million. And but also, I don't know the exact story. I have a periphery knowledge of this, but the night that John Belushi died, he had a meeting. Because he died of a drug overdose. I believe Robert De Niro was there, and he had a meeting. Moments before, or minutes or hours before, because he was there with John Belushi to discuss a part in the movie. And then that night, John Belushi died. And then apparently 4 months later, he had some run-ins with the law because they turned it into a homicide investigation at one point, and they thought De Niro whacked him or something. What? I believe that's true.
That's crazy,
or at least somewhat true.
Dang.
Not that he whacked him. That's not true. But the police were like, maybe De Niro had something to do with this.
After many disputes about the runtime and pre-production, filming finally got underway on June 14th, 1982, and lasted until April 1983.
So the fact that this movie was because this was very hard to get made, because especially during pre-production, they had so many run-ins with the runtime, and but also the one of the things that's very important to mention, which I was thinking about while I was watching this, and then in the book they mentioned it. In 1980, there was a movie called Heaven's Gate, and that was, I think, Mike Cimino directed that, and the budget was, I believe, $40 million, which was huge at the time, and it bombed. And that's like a very important movie, because that was when studios were no longer, and that was a collapse of United Artists, and that was when studios kind of got more strict about who they're giving their money to, and a lot of big directors weren't allowed to make giant movies anymore for a long time. If you look, a lot of the directors went underground in the 80s. Robert Altman just started doing plays, obscure plays, as his students at whatever school he was teaching at as the crew. So he did like Secret Honor and Streamers, and Come Back Jimmy Dean to the Five and Dine, and some other stuff that I've seen. And the Scorsese's Raging Bull came out the same weekend, I believe. So when United Artists collapsed, Raging Bull came out. So the release of it was kind of handicapped, and then years later, it started to be a popular movie. Scorsese did King of Comedy and After Hours, but he was never, that section of the 80s, a lot of directors weren't able to get movies made. So the fact that Sergio Leone was able to get $30 million to make Once Upon a Time in America was a big deal. Even though it probably took place somewhat outside of America, because it still, was an Italian co-production, I guess. I don't know. But there are some funny stories from the production where, because James Woods was hired, and he was in a movie. He was known in movies at the time as being a guy who was kind of unhinged. What was the movie he was in 1979? It was like something Road, or I forget. But he was in that movie, and I think Leone saw him in that movie and said, "Oh, he has this weird intensity behind his eyes where he can kind of just snap at any point." That's very important to Max's character, especially towards the end of the movie, where he becomes very unhinged. And that was the roles that he was getting. But he gets the call from Sergio Leone, like, to be in the movie. And James Wood said later, he's like, "This is the peak of my life, of my career, being in this movie. It's this giant, sweeping American epic, and that's never, it's one of the big seminal movies of the 20th century." And it doesn't feel like that, because the which we'll get to, the release was handicapped. So the same way, like, Raging Bull came out and it is now known as this big movie, the same thing sort of happened with Once Upon a Time in America. It was originally known as this giant disaster, at least in America. But there's James Woods recounted a story where he was working with Sergio was crazy, because a lot of directors would just say, "All right, I want it to rain in the mid take of the scene, so let's turn on the rain machine in the mid take." But we can't have a rain machine because it needs to be a giant wide shot. So we have to look at the weather forecasts and see when it's going to rain, and then hope it starts raining during the middle of the take. And sure enough, he calls action, and it started raining in the middle of the take.
Dang, that's crazy. Like, perfect timing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is crazy. And then there's other stuff, like there's a shot that is like the first time they show 1930s New York, or 20s, whatever, or maybe be the teens, when they're all kids, and they come out of Fat Mo's diner, and they go into the street, and there's all the pedestrians there, and the crane pulls back, and they did like 36 takes of it, because Leone would be like, "There's these extras left a gap over here. We got to do it again. Oh, we got to do this." And then finally there was a take where everybody's like, "This is the one. We got it." And he goes, "All right, we're going to have to do it again." There was a girl all the way in the back who looked at the camera.
Whoa.
So they, on like the 29th take, or like the 40th take, they finally got it. And also you expect, because obviously like a Western, like, you go, "Oh, well, there's a lot of bombastic things. There's, that's a giant production, a lot of giant things they have to do." So on Once Upon a Time in America, it's a much more subtle movie, so there's not going to be a lot of big things like that. But there's some shots there's a throwaway shot. It's a throwaway shot, but it's crazy the timing, where this car comes around and then comes across the street, makes a right turn, makes a left turn, and then at the end of the shot, it passes under a train tracks, and then the train passes over. It's very hard to time that shot, There was another scene where they had an hour to close off the street and shoot the scene, and and they were like, and Sergio Leone was like, please let us get one more setup, one more setup, and the cops were like, fine, and then they do the one more setup, and then Sergio's like, I want more, and then the cops were like, come on, you got to come out of here, let's go, and then what they did is that the crew got in cars and pretended that there was an accident at one side of the street, so they blocked traffic, and they started to film the scene, and the cops were like, we're never letting the Italians in here again.
Dang. On May 20th, 1984, Once Upon a Time in America premiered at Cannes Film Festival to the best reactions of Leone's career. But like Once Upon a Time in the West and Duck You Sucker, the American release of the movie was butchered.
So I still don't know if it's Cannes or Cannes. I say Cannes or Cannes. I'll never say one or the other.
Whatever.
But I actually forgot to mention during the late 70s, he actually became a recurring jury member at the Cannes or Cannes Film Festival. And then that premiere, the premiere at Cannes or Cannes, they showed the 3 hour and 49-minute cut, which you can find on Paramount Plus right now, right? And it got giant, great reviews, like the best of Leone's career. And then, but then I talked about the runtime before. Originally, when they put the movie together, it was 10 hours long, and then
Jesus Christ.
So then,
what?
Yeah. So then, and then they edited him, Leone and the editor finally edited it down to 6 hours, and then they edited it down to 4 hours and 11, 4 hours and 20, let's say.
Yeah.
And there's a Martin Scorsese in 2012. His company restored the movie in the 4 hour and 11-minute version, and that's known as the definitive version. And Leone said that was the version he wanted to make, but apparently the one that's 3:49 is the best one.
Yeah.
But the studio was like, yeah, listen, we can't have it be this long. And then Leone was like, I thought you guys wanted it in 2 parts.
Yeah.
So they had a contractual agreement. Apparently there was an agreement where if the movie exceeded a certain length, he would lose his final cut. So final cut is like a thing where, like, if you were a producer and I made a movie, you would in the contract go, you have final cut over the movie, saying we can't make any edits without your approval.
Okay.
So, or was it the budget? The budget, I forget. It's a little squirrely because there was some stuff going on with the studio. Either the budget went over budget, and then they said they went over budget, you lost your final cut, or they said you can have final cut as long as it's under 3 hours, let's say. And obviously it wasn't, and they ended up taking them away. He lost final cut and the length of the movie. They took it away, and they cut this movie down to like 2 hours and 20 minutes. And what they did is they took out the flashback structure of it, which I described before when we were talking about the visually motivated flashbacks. How there's a ton of them in this. They just cut out that whole thing completely, and they just started and did it chronologically, and it didn't make any sense. It was released, and this is only in the U.S. Places like France or whatever, and in Europe, it was released in the 3 hour and 49-minute version, and it got good reviews, and I'm assuming okay box office from those. But in the U.S., it completely bombed, and got terrible reviews. This one lady saw it in 1984 and said it's the worst movie of the year. And then when she saw the 3 hour and 49 version, she said it's one of the best movies of the decade. And then they took the movie away, and then Leone sued and lost the battle. And then he was saying this, I forget who he said it to. Maybe it was Bertolucci. And he said, I make a nice movie. That's literally what he goes. Yeah, he goes, I spent so long making a nice movie, and they took the essence out of it. And then somebody goes, Leone, put it back in. You can put the essence back in. And I don't know exactly when the cut was restored or when American audiences got to see the initial or the actual cut of the movie, the 3 hour and 49-minute version. But yeah, it was, people said like it kind of broke his heart. And that was it got butchered the worst out of all of his movies. And it was also the first time he made a movie since 1971. So it was 13 years in between the movies.
Yeah, that's
and
tough.
He finally comes back and this is a movie that he because when he was producing all those movies in the 70s, he goes, I'm only doing it because this is the only one I want to make, that I want to direct. This is the only one that I find worth telling. So he spent 13 years waiting to make it. And then finally he did, and it was taken away from him in the worst way possible. And I think in a documentary I saw about it, in a behind-the-scenes documentary, I forget who exactly it was, but I think one of the executives that was in charge of butchering the release, essentially in the U.S., came out and said, like, why did I do it? I was naive. I didn't know what I was talking about. You know?
Yeah, he just didn't. Yeah, because I was just about to say, Imagine being the guy who either has to cut down that movie more and then turn it into what it was when they released it. I wonder if the person who actually had to edit it was like hated it as well.
Yeah, they got the editor. I think they got the guy who edited Police Academy to re-edit the movie.
Oh, okay.
Because there's a sequence in the beginning where there's this, and I do agree that it's a little bit excessive, where when we first flash back to the past, there's a telephone ringing, and it goes on and it rings like 24 times. And after the second half of the ringing, like after the first 12, it's like, all right, please answer the phone.
Yeah.
And I don't that the significance of the phone only becomes clear much later in the movie. And so the editor said he saw that and was like, after the first few rings, I'm like, all right, answer the phone. After the first 12, I'm like, oh my God, please. And then after the first 22, I'm like, Jesus Christ, this is painful to the audience. And he goes, and after it finally ended, I said, I'm cutting this movie down in half. The guy who edited, I think it was the guy who edited Police Academy. I'm pretty sure.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think it probably would have done. I don't know. Even if it still bombed, it might have just not have broken even if they released it in the 3 hour and 49-minute version, because Godfather Part 2 is 3 hours and 30 minutes, I believe, or maybe 3 hours and 14. But it still made money. That was 1974. It was only a 10-year difference. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to Monday morning quarterback it and be like, they should have released the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that was frustrating to Leone is when he was in litigation, it was hard for him to pinpoint who was exactly responsible, because every time he talked to somebody, they would either get promoted or fired or shifted around, so that he couldn't really make any progress anywhere. But I do think, in terms of why it became one of the best movies of all time, for me, it's not Leone's favorite to me. It doesn't drag, because when you watch long movies like this and you accept that the length in the runtime, you don't really mind how long it is, because you're like, I'm giving into this, you know?
Yeah.
But for me, I think it represents Leone when he was his most skilled and talented, even though I don't think it's his best movie or the most enjoyable movie, let's say. Because I talked about in DocuSucker how he kind of abandoned the boyishness, fun energy style, and then went to politics, and the politics was heavy-handed. In this, he completely abandons the boyish style, entirely, but he does have some political stuff in it, but it's much more subtle and much more,
Yeah.
It's done with a more deft touch than it was in DocuSucker. And there's subtleties in this that I think are very, very good, and it represents his most mature work. And there's visual flares, because you think like, oh, how is he going to do visual flares in like a drama type thing, like a gangster crime drama? And there are visual flares in the way that he has those the visual the motivations for the flashbacks and the visuals, but also there's things, for example, like how things are revealed visually. One of the things he does to show that Max. So basically, what happens? Max, for those who don't know, Max dies along with him and his other friends. They get up into all this crime hijinks, and Max dies. And then years later, he comes back, and some guy sending him money and being like, "It was one last job for you." And he goes back to what's her name, Deborah, and he goes, "Who's Senator Bailey? Why does the Senator Bailey want to know me or whatever?" And then she goes, "Senator Bailey's son is outside," and Senator Bailey's son is played by the same actor who played young Max. So nobody's saying, "Hey, that kid, Senator Bailey, is Max," because that's Max's son. Visually, we know that that's Max's son, because it's just a great decision, a creative choice to put Max's son as the guy who played young Max, right?
Yeah.
And there's another thing where, for example, in terms of the visuals, Fat Mo is inside the diner, and he gets a call, and then all of a sudden he asks everybody to leave his store, and they're like, "What?" He's like, "I'm very sorry. Come on, let's leave." And he goes back on the phone, and then the camera cranes down, and we see it's Noodles on the phone, on the payphone, calling him.
Mm-hmm.
So now we know that he's like, that's another thing. That feels like a silent movie. That feels like more of like the silent era, the way it kind of moves around and it kind of there's this lateral movement to
Yeah,
the.
that's what
the
I was about
frame.
to say. I've heard people say that this is basically like a silent film
Yes.
in many ways.
Hmm. And going back to the subtleties I was talking about, is there a lot of Leone westerns have a climax that's very bombastic and like somebody gets shot or something. It's very, very it's very satisfying in a sensational way. But in this, and this goes back to his maturity at this stage in his filmmaking career, is at the climax of this movie, he goes back and Max goes, "Hey, kill me because there's going to be an investigation since I'm running for office. There's no way I'm going to get past the investigation. They're going to find out who I am because he's taken on this whole new identity."
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, "Kill me, and you can get out this door and you can get your revenge on me for lying to you and stealing your life."
Mm.
And then Noodles doesn't want to kill him, and he leaves. And you expect something like, a gunshot to be heard as he walks away to signify that Max killed himself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something they actually do in the edited version. They actually switched a lot of stuff up. And they did it so there's a gunshot. And that so it unambiguously kills Max. But what they do in Leone's cut is he walks out and he sees a garbage truck outside, Noodles. And then he goes, "Okay, whoa, garbage truck, okay." And then he walks down the street and he starts walking away, and all of a sudden the garbage truck starts. And then he's like, "What?" And the garbage truck starts to move, and as the truck starts to move, we see it's a very long shot, so we can't see. It's almost like a silhouette of somebody who looks like Max come out into the street and starts running to the garbage truck. And then as the garbage truck passes the camera, we see Max run behind it, and then the garbage truck comes by, and then we don't see Max anymore. And then we get a view, and it's all in one shot. It's just a simple pan. And then when the garbage truck pans, we see behind it there's a shredder, a garbage shredder in the back of the garbage truck, basically saying that, okay, he could have jumped in, or whoever that was probably just jumped in there, right? But the reason that's so smart is because it doesn't say, "Hey, that was Max who jumped in there." There's an ambiguity as to who it was. It could be, maybe it was Max.
Yeah.
Maybe it was somebody that De Niro projected in his head to represent that, whether it was Max or not in real life, in Noodles' head, Max is done in the past. He's not thinking about him anymore. He's gotten over Max. He's left him in the past, right? Or Max is dead to him in a sense. And that may seem like a silly ambiguity for like, oh, it's in Noodles' head, or maybe he just like thought that up or something. But there is another, subtle quirk that or curveball that the movie throws that shouldn't be taken super literally and shouldn't be argued as a primary idea for what's happening in the movie. But the movie essentially opens it, or our introduction to Noodles' character is when he's high in an opium den. And the very last shot of the movie is him high in an opium den. So one could say that this whole thing is this weird, out of sequence, out of order, chronological dream of either something that's happened to him in his life or something or the future. He's imagining a future or something. And it's this weird fever dream that he's just going through as he's in this opium den. And that would suggest why it's called Once Upon a Time in America, because that would essentially turn the movie into a fantasy or a dreamlike fairy tale that's just taking place in his drug-addled brain, right? Which is, I talked about why the name, the reason why Once Upon a Time in the West is called Once Upon a Time is because it represents a time in the West where out of the goodness of the hero's heart, the woman was able to fulfill her dream. Now that I think about it, I don't know why Duck-You-Sucker was called Once Upon a Time in the Revolution. I don't know what the fantasy aspect of that is, because it's a very cynical movie. Or at least, a very negatively charged movie for the protagonist. You know what I mean? Which I guess Once Upon a Time in America is too, but I don't know. It's interesting. If you know why it's called Once Upon a Time in the Revolution, let us know.
Link it down
Does
below.
that make sense, the whole Once Upon a Time in America thing? Like the dream thing?
Yeah.
All right. We got one more section. Let's bang this shit out. What do you guys think of Once Upon a Time in America? Have you watched? Actually, have you guys watched the 4 hour and 11-minute cut? And should I watch it? And have you seen the 2 hour and 20-minute cut? And should I watch it? Because how bad is that?
Did you see it? You didn't.
The
see
2 hour
it?
and 20-minute one? No.
Okay.
I don't know if I could see it anymore. I don't know if they have it available
that's what I was
anywhere.
gonna
They might have
ask.
Batman vs Superman Ultimate cutted it.
Leone's final years. When Leone was flying to New York to secure funding for Once Upon a Time in America, he bought a book called The 900 Days: The Siege of Leningrad by Harrison Salisbury.
So in the same way that, what was his name, Fulcio Marcella read aloud the Once Upon a Time in America to Sergio Leone, he did the same thing with this book as well. and that, I think, was around. Also, I didn't talk about that. Sergio Leone turned down directing The Godfather.
Oh, that's pretty crazy.
Which now it's like, oh my God, really? But at the time it was like The Godfather, what?
Mm-hmm.
You know, maybe it wasn't that. Nobody knew it was going to be The Godfather.
Yeah, that's true.
And also that corresponds with this Leningrad movie. He was also offered to direct Reds in 1980, which is the Warren Beatty movie about the October Revolution, I think it's called, which I don't know much about that movie. But that was one of the movies that was postponed because Stanley Kubrick was taking so long at Pinewood Studios that the productions on Reds and Steven Spielberg's Raiders of the Lost Ark had to be pushed back a little bit. Anyway, so Leone wanted to make that movie for a while, and he basically went to Russia and was talked, and like just through sheer tyranny of will, just talked to Russian officials, the Soviet Union,
It's pretty crazy.
in the 80s, and was just like, yeah, I want to make this big movie about whatever. And Stalin, originally the Siege of Leningrad, Stalin prohibited any creative interpretations of Leningrad. And I think there was one like TV skit, movie, commercial type thing, TV show, I don't know what it was about it, but that was it. And so Leone was doing research for a long time and developing the script and what the story was going to be. First of all, this might have been the most ambitious production of all time. It was going to be a multinational movie where the Russian government and the Italian government corporations were going to be involved. It was going to be a co-production. And he was like, fuck America, because I don't want to make another movie for them, because that was good. So eventually he was able to get the proper funding. Like just by explaining the first shot he was able to secure $15 million in funding, where it starts and it's just this big, like long, super long, sweeping crane dolly shot that goes on, citizens doing all this stuff, like running, getting shot, eating each other, whatever, and then the camera goes up and focuses on a general's eye, and then it pans out and there's 1,000 tanks rolling up on the city and shit like that. And based off that pitch on that first opening shot, he was able to secure $15 million. And then the total budget of what was agreed for, other outlets were reporting different things. Some of them said it was $30 million, and another said it was $100 million. And if it was $100 million, that was before Terminator 2 had its $100 million budget. So that would have been the highest budgeted movie of all time, and the first one to break $100 million budget. And the story was going to be, it wasn't going to be an action movie or a crime movie or any kind of like historical political movie. It was going to have like a historical and political backdrop, but the main focus is going to be a love story by this journalist who didn't really care about the cause in Leningrad and was just there for reporting, and then he decides to stay for the whole time, and then he falls in love and of course wants to stay. And the very excellent idea that he was going to do for the climax is that the guy was going to die. He was going to get killed in action. And this goes back to that's the visual. Like that's so intelligent. That's such an intelligent idea. Is the climax was going to be, she's watching footage on the news, and it's going to say like reporter killed while filming or whatever, and she's going to recognize the footage. Like that's how he would. That's like she can recognize that it's him based off how he's shooting it, and she watches that and knows that he's dead. Like that's such an intelligent idea. Yeah. It's not even another face. It's just her face, and that's so great. Mm-hmm. So I think that would have been a pretty baller movie, and but yeah, so he had some funding on that, and that was in the works and stuff.
Mm-hmm. I feel like that's that setting is a setting that you don't see in a lot of movies.
Yeah.
Like Leningrad, like the Russia at that time period is like.
Well, because the
There's
only
not
way to
many
film
movie-
it, they
yeah.
talked about the only way to film it is to get access to the entire city. He was
Yeah.
going to vacate the whole city to film the
That's
movie,
crazy.
essentially.
Mm-hmm. Other projects that Leone was considering was a TV series titled Cult and a feature western titled A Place Only Mary Knows.
So Cult was going to be that the premise of that TV show was going to it was going to be a mini series that tracked the Wild West through this one gun. So it was going to show it being made in Hartford, Connecticut, and then it was going to be shown shipped out and then used and stuff like that, and other people would pick it up. And at some point, also his health started to decline a lot around this time.
Yeah.
On the set of Once Upon a Time in America, he started to have heart problems. They shut down production for a couple of days because of that. And then they said he started to diet and stuff like that. But he was only 60, and he would walk upstairs and then get out of breath and shit.
Yeah.
And he talked with Clint Eastwood. They had a meeting and just caught up, and then they talked about maybe doing something or whatever. And his idea for Cult was that it was gonna open up with Clint Eastwood as the man with no name, getting his gun made in Hartford, Connecticut, and then he travels out, and then he sees he gets in a gunfight and immediately gets killed, and then somebody else picks up the call. He really wanted to kill Clint Eastwood.
Yeah.
And then the idea was maybe the two characters for that would be Mickey Rourke and Richard Gere, because he was talking with them about doing something, but he goes, the structure for that wouldn't work, so he abandoned it. And then eventually with Richard Gere and Mickey Rourke, he had the Place Only Mary Knows, where these guys go out west and join the Civil War, and they're looking for some gold. It's sort of similar to Good and the Bad, the Ugly, and that was going to be for Mickey Rourke or whatever, and that, of course, never materialized.
On May 3rd, 1989, Sergio Leone passed away in his home due to heart failure. He was 60 years old.
So he was it was like 1 a.m. He was in bed with his wife, Carla, and they were watching a movie called I Want to Live! Directed by Robert Wise, which is I think of Robert Wise. It was about a prostitute who was trying to beat a death row charge to prove her innocence and stuff. And she said that he didn't even have a heart attack. His heart just stopped.
Oh my God!
And like he was like, "Hey, I'm sorry, I don't really feel good." And then within seconds, he just was dead.
Dang.
Which is pretty crazy. And then of course all the production on the of the 900 Days just stopped, and they were looking for any replacement directors because they invested some money into it. Originally, Alex Cox was approached, who was a big fan of Leone's westerns, and a few other directors. And then it just became one of those projects that was stuck in development hell for like 20 years, and eventually in 2017 or somewhere around there, the guy was like, "We're not going to film this ever."
Yeah.
So
That would be cool if one day they got around to it, but it seems like a lot.
yeah. We didn't even talk about Ennio Morricone and him. They went to school together and then subsequently met up.
I did, yeah.
And then he goes, I don't know why we're talking about this now.
Yeah,
but he goes, "Yeah, I heard you did a score or whatever." He goes, "Yeah, I heard your score for this movie. It was a shitty knockoff of Dimitri Tompkin." And he goes, "You're exactly right, because that's what they hired me to make."
Yeah.
And stuff. And then it's like them two being together and like their relationship in the movies. It's like, imagine if you became top 5 movie composers of all time, and I became top 20 movie directors of all time, and we were doing movies. And it's crazy how Leone is, because if you look, like, he's in the conversation everywhere. Because a lot of people look at those movies like they were, his westerns were dismissed at first, but in terms of how much impact they had on movie making in general is completely, I think it's understated how much impact he actually had. And he's in a lot of mentions for like the greatest directors, the most influential directors, and he only made 6 movies.
Yeah.
Which is something too. So I think in terms of bang for your buck, it was mainly his first 4 movies were incredibly influential.
Yeah.
He basically ended the western, and then he ended the gangster genre with Once Upon a Time in America. So, do you have anything else to say?
You said it best, but he said he did a lot with very few movies.
Yeah. So, all right. There was a story where so he goes, I'm making a movie about Leningrad or something, or maybe it was Once Upon a Time in America, and they go, "Oh, what's it about?" And then 4 hours went by as he literally just acted out the whole movie for him.
Yeah.
So, yeah. What'd you guys think of that one? If you're still here, excellent. Thank you. We're glad you enjoyed it, or maybe you were forced to watch this. In which case, we are glad you didn't enjoy it. Again, if you want to see any more Sergio Leone stuff, we have a playlist that I, made that's in the description. My neck hurts so bad from talking. Yeah, our next episode, we might do a bonus, not a bonus episode, but we might do just an episode on one movie and try to do a deep dive into that one movie. We might do Eyes Wide Shut. We'll figure it out. Yeah, if you're still here, like and subscribe, comment. Let us know what your favorite Leone movies are. And if you want to see us do a certain episode on a certain concept and a director's filmography or a movie or a series of movies, like maybe Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy.
Nope.
Whoa.
That was a good idea.
Oh, shit.
We should do that one.
We should actually do that. That'd be excellent. So yeah, it could be anything. Just figure it out. And then, yeah, you guys figure it out. You guys write the script.
We're done coming up with.
We're done coming up with voids. I hate coming up with voids to say.
Figure it out. That's so funny to say to the audience.
Yeah.
Figure it out.
So yeah, and also if you have any friends that like movies, tell your friends about the podcast. 'Cause that's probably like the most homegrown way to kind of build an audience. That'd be pretty cool. So yeah, excellent. All right, bye. Thanks.
Bye.
That's pretty good.